Good morning. Now call the February 28th, 2019 special work session of the Marion County School Board to order at 11:30 a.m. Please silence your electronic devices to avoid disturbing others. I now ask the school board attorney to explain the rules for this board meeting. And he is noted, so I'll read it. This work session is a public meeting, and as defined in Florida's Sunshine Law, the board is dedicated to full transparency in its meeting and its work. In compliance with the Sunshine Law, the board has adopted uniform meeting procedures, including the right for citizens to participate. The board will allow public comment regarding any work session items listed on today's agenda at the appropriate time. Speakers must fill out a request form and hand it to the school board secretary. After the board and superintendent have completed their discussion on a particular agenda item, the secretary will call the speakers' names in the order received. At the podium, speakers are asked to state their full name and address and to spell their last names. Each speaker will have 3 minutes. As required by the Sunshine Law, the board must maintain orderly conduct and proper decorum throughout this meeting. Speakers may criticize subject matter and decisions in a respectful manner, but not people. Finally, speakers must be very careful not to violate the privacy rights of others, especially students and their family members, by mentioning their names or other identifying information. Thank you for your attention to these important rules. We will now begin the work session with the superintendent's administrative brief.
Thank you. Just 2 very quick things. First of all, you'll be getting an email from Mr. Christian as we are prepping for our Community Reads website for April. We'd love to have you all as celebrity readers. So we have a couple ideas. So he's going to send you an email. So if we could work with you on that, that would be very exciting. So we can get you all on for April. And then secondly, I want to thank Mrs. King for her for the communication today about what data for the next work session, or board meeting, which would be the 12th. In reflecting afterwards, we still need some points of clarification. So I brought Mr. McGowan so he can hear it directly. So I'm not interpreting. Because we won't have the quarterly data till the April meeting where we were planning for, we're going to provide attendance and discipline data for this one. And then Mrs. King, you had mentioned middle schools, and then Mrs. Thrower, last time you had mentioned an Evergreen, an update on Evergreen. So can we just hear from you what you want? Because whatever you want, we'll bring you, and we're excited to do it. We just need to know, because I don't want them to go to all the work to put together what we think you want, and then to be called out publicly when it's not what you wanted. So we'll do whatever you want.
Okay, I'll begin. Right. During the meantime, we probably need to be updated on the attendance and discipline issues that are taking place. In the past, I know we were looking at middle and high school, how they're performing throughout the year, and I think it may have been a year ago when we were talking about this, and we've yet to receive any information on how the middle and high schools are doing. So I would like us to be, updated on that, just so that we're aware again. So come summer, so we have a pulse on how we're doing as a district. So I think it's good that we're looking at how we're doing overall as a district, and also I want to make sure that we're staying on top of the turnaround, the bottom schools.
Yes, ma'am.
Quarterly.
So historically, for the quarterly updates, as you know, we've focused on just the turnaround in L300 schools, which is all elementary, and so that's what we've come to you with academic, behavior, and attendance. So we can certainly at the next board meeting present you secondary data as well. The academic data will be a little premature just because we're right in the window of our QSMA administration, which is the next academic data we would come to you with. But attendance and behavior, we could certainly do that.
And actually just take a minute. We're not asking like tons of effort, because they should be at your fingertips anyways. Like, I'm sure that you guys are aware how we look as a district with our attendance and our discipline.
Sure.
So seeing that that's at your fingertips, I think maybe, and it doesn't even have to be at a school board meeting, it can be a work session and just take 5 minutes, and here it is, and we can just pop it in our notebook and just have something to follow. And
so are you okay with the same format we've used for the turnaround updates, where it's just comparing the district data on those 3 points, but for all schools. Is that what I'm hearing for elementary, middle, and high?
Did you guys ever decide what you wanted to do to identify it for the middle and high schools? Because I believe you guys said that you were looking into it, and we never.
So last year, so I think, yes, last year when we did the quick fact sheets, we used QSMA data, whereas elementary we used iReady data. So that was different between the two. This year, because from what we interpreted as the focus of the board was the turnaround in L300 schools, in terms of the quick fact sheets, we've only done elementary this year, and we just got through updating for Q2. But again, for the board presented turnaround updates, that has only been for elementary, but we could certainly add secondary to that. But for, like I say, the academic piece, we could, the most recent data we could give you would be Q2 data, which would be from December. At the March 12th meeting, we would be right in the middle of that new test window. So we couldn't provide really anything to you on academics at that point for secondary or for elementary. But
you had talked about last year how you would compile the data, and you were going to start with the middle school. So do you have, so our high school and middle schools are also doing the QSMAs, correct? Do they do iReady at all, or is that strictly elementary?
No, middle school does. It's
Okay.
A little bit different though. Middle school, it is designed for all 6th through 8th grade students, but what we learned last year through the administration of iReady was, especially for the higher performing students, the time that it took them to complete that was much longer than the average, just because they're the higher level performing students, and it's an adaptive test, so it just took a while. So a lot of the students that are in high school level courses in middle school, they're not taking that assessment. But most of the students are, but high school, no, they're not. And that's why even on the quick fact sheets last year, we decided to use QSMA because they all were taking that. So that would be a measure that we could use across the board for comparison.
And the correlation to the QSMA and the FSA
Arrived.
is good?
Yes, yes. And so the analysis we did over the summer was what it basically told us that students that performed at the district average on the QSMA, it correlated to performing the district average on the FSA. And so we're going to do that analysis obviously at the end of this year, but we're expecting to see the same thing because we know those assessments are written to the state standard, they are written to the item spec, which is why they're difficult, but there is a good correlation there, yes.
So maybe the QSMA data for middle and high is what we want to look at.
And then historically for elementary, we presented both to you just
Correct.
because they take both.
And I think we need both for that,
Okay.
especially our turnaround schools.
Okay.
And you've presented Q2, right? We did
Yes.
that. Yes.
And that wasn't that long ago. That was maybe the end of January.
Right. I was going to say,
It
I
was
was
January, and I think I was a little sidetracked because we had the external operator and just
Right.
different things. But I think, and I appreciate it that it's done during school board meetings. But I think it might also be good if we could also have work sessions, so then we could actually discuss it if we have concerns and things that we need to,
Okay.
when we need to ask questions and stuff like that.
That's
So a
fine.
little more comfortable setting. Miss Stacy, you had a question?
Yeah, I also had a question. It's not so much on your side, but while we're talking about data that we'd like to have, and you mentioned attendance, I'd like to know, like, how many students we have. I don't know what we call it. It's not teen court. It's like parent court or whatever, where they go. What do y'all have a name for it?
Truancy?
The truancy, where they.
they don't do that anymore.
You know, that,
They
Why?
don't do it anymore. Because the state
State
attorney,
attorney did not want to follow up with it.
So we don't get to do the one where they go.
no,
the TIP program,
Yeah, the tip. That's what I was trying to
No.
not to my knowledge. Okay.
that's because it has not been a priority for the state attorney, and that's why we are having so many very large individual truancy issues.
say. Exactly.
So when it's not a priority for the state attorney for truancy court, then there's no consequences for these parents not getting their
So
kids to school.
so did Brad King say he didn't want to continue it?
I'm not sure.
And you could talk to
Yeah,
Brad
I'm
King
not
then.
sure.
He,
I'm not.
well, not in those exact words.
I'll go talk to him.
Okay. Then come back and report to us.
I
Miss
will.
Thorold.
Yes, and it is frustrating, Ms. Stacy, because schools are trying their hearts out to incentivize kids for coming to school and for having good attendance, but there's no teeth. And sometimes you need to balance both.
Oh, I know somebody-
Encouragement and consequences.
I know somebody got some teeth in it, and she was a kid that grew up with my daughter. She got called in there, and she got teeth in it.
Mhm.
I tell you what, that turned her around. Her child started going to school because she was about to have her child taken away.
Well, and it's also written into the Code of Student Conduct that if a student has, I believe it's more than 15 unexcused absences within a 90-day period, and they're getting any kind of benefit and benefits and help from the state, that there's supposed to be a
The
process
state
that's
statute is
triggered.
very clear about this.
It is.
State statute is very, very clear, and if we're not following it because of the state attorney's office, then I guess I need to take my statute down there and show Attorney King, because we are required to do this. This is not something that we may do. We shall do this. We shall turn these children in after like 9 absences in a quarter or something. I mean, it's really not that
15
many.
unexcused, I think, within a 90-day
Mr.
period.
Gibbs, do you
which
have
is-
any information on this at all?
Not on the state attorney's decision, this goes back years. I do know
No,
that
we were doing this. We were doing TIP until a year or so ago. When did we stop doing TIP?
my understanding is statewide, state attorneys are not prosecuting any parents for truancy issues. There are a few districts that still have in-house people or their attorneys try and do it, but they can't bring up criminal charges under the statutes. That has to go through the state attorney. And my understanding is they simply are not doing it statewide.
Because when high schoolers get their driver's licenses pulled, and when that started, I was in the classroom.
You
Let me
can
tell you
get,
something.
you can get a civil order.
They started attending
that
school
orders
regularly.
parents to take their kids to school, but all they'll get is a contempt if they don't meet that order.
There's no
But
teeth.
my understanding is it's
There's no
statewide.
teeth.
So that's what's happened then. That's why the whole thing's falling apart. Because when Mr. Tomlin was here, that's one thing, because I hammered on attendance, and we got that TIP thing going. We had kids going before the judge for the first time in a couple of years, really. We had this, I went and sat in some of the hearings, and I remember this cute little guy from Lake Weir Middle or someplace, and he said, and the judge said, why are you here before, why are you not going to school? You know what he told the judge with me sitting there? I didn't really think y'all were serious about this. He told the judge that. The judge goes, well, son, this is what's fixing to happen to you, you know?
Well,
And
yes, and it's going to happen to all of us because the absence and tardy data continues to be very difficult to solve at Oakcrest. It's their major problem, and it's going to cost us all a lot of money, let alone losing these kids.
that's why I brought
If
this
they are
topic
that
up, because
season.
I knew
Okay,
something had
I'm going to
happened.
bring us back in because we're here to discuss
Right.
ESD.
And I do want to share what I'd like to get from
And I was
Ellen.
going to really
Yeah.
do that, and then we need to move forward.
Okay,
I
great.
didn't know we took TIP.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Yes, I would love for the rest of the board to hear the information contained in the monthly report. Sitting in on the conference call with the state regarding Evergreen and their academic data. There were some assessments done in January, and it was looking very grim. And there hasn't really been a reassessment done by the external operator. They weren't able to say with no students being at 70% or higher, meeting the standard of area and
Right.
perimeter in January, they weren't able to give any updated information. Okay, now we're into March. Where are they now? So I would just like that academic information shared from that quarterly report because, again, not wanting any surprises, it's very concerning.
And we all got the minutes from that last call, so I agree with you. It is concerning, and so I think we need to concentrate a little bit on the Evergreen data because we're fixing to go into external operator interviews, hoping that we don't have to have another external operator for another school. But I think we're going to have some serious decisions to make about this. So sharing that information would be great.
Ms. Rowe, are you referring to the internal assessments that the
Yeah.
external operator?
Yeah.
So at the district level, we don't have access to
They
those.
don't
They're
have
not
access.
district assessments. And I'm not a part of those monthly calls, so would that be more appropriate for, I'm just throwing, for the external operator to present to you, or would the report suffice, or?
Whoever has that data and whoever
It's
can
their
explain
data.
it is who we need.
We need the external operator because it's their assessment. We're still doing QSMA and iReady, but they have this other
Yeah, they're doing
assessment that they're
scrimmages in
using.
between.
Scrimmages in between, and that's the data we need to have a conversation about.
So are we doing QSMAs there at that school still?
Yes.
Yes, ma'am.
How are they looking?
Well, we saw that
We
second
said
quarter.
that.
He gave us that data second quarter.
But that, okay, so you haven't had anything since then? I mean, that was
Correct.
it?
Yes, ma'am.
They're
That
in
was
the
in
middle-
January,
They're
right?
in the middle of doing QSMAs
Yeah,
now.
actually, Monday is when we start quarter 3 QSMA, so that'll be our newest information.
How long does it take to get that back?
It's a 2-week window, and it's instantaneous. I mean, it's in, as soon as they scan it in, we can see it. So we can certainly present that to you.
Yeah, as soon as we have Evergreen's data, can you get that
Sure.
to all of us?
Yes, ma'am.
So you're starting it, you said Monday?
Monday.
So you said it'll be 2 weeks?
They have a 2-week window to administer it, yes, ma'am.
So we had planned for April 9th. Is that the earliest, or could we push it for the 26th and have it separate? It's whatever you want.
Yeah, we could,
I think as soon as we get, I mean, the sooner we get it, however fast you can get it to us.
it depends on just how you're wanting it. If you're wanting it just, presented like we've normally done at our quarterly updates, which is normally how we present that. But if you want just it simply emailed to you, I can provide it that way, and that would be more timely, whichever way you
Maybe
prefer.
discuss it in a work session.
Why don't we, if you don't mind emailing it to us, and then
Okay.
in April, we have the,
So are we saying at the March 12th board meeting, we want the external operator to provide us with the scrimmage information, and then we want discipline and attendance data? Is that what we're saying? Because I'm hearing several things,
Yeah,
and
just
I
want
think he's a
clarification on
little
what I-
confused on exactly what it is we want.
okay. I've heard from Evergreen, we would like to have the QSMA reports.
And the scrimmage data, because that's available now.
Yes, and I don't know any information about those.
He
but
doesn't
if
have
it's-
Yes,
We'll ask them for it.
So it's a matter of getting it.
Okay, so we want that, but we would like the attendance and the discipline for all schools,
All
the
schools.
district.
Okay.
The
Yeah.
district.
Up to date,
Up
yes,
to date,
For March 12th,
yes.
yes,
okay?
okay, so
Okay.
we're gonna do that. And then, we also would like middle and high school, how we're doing with those.
Okay.
I mean, you should have those, we haven't been updated on anything.
Yeah, so for March 12th, I can certainly provide academic data for quarter 2 for middle and high,
Okay,
because that has not been presented to you. So the only thing missing out of that presentation would be academics for elementary,
correct.
because you've already received that.
And that's really, that'll.
Correct, and then I can follow up with you specifically via email for Evergreen, and then we can do our normal quarterly update for all schools in April.
Now, will that be at a Tuesday meeting or a Thursday meeting?
They're typically at a board meeting, unless you,
That's the thing, do we want to?
It's up to y'all.
I would rather have it at a workshop so that we can really spend the time discussing
Because I think
it.
sometimes when this stuff comes on TV, I'll get a call, usually from employees, the next day. What was that about? And I thought we were doing better, and I don't know, sometimes I think it might alarm some people that maybe the information really wasn't so negative as it appears, because when you look at comparing certain belly button to belly button, it's not that negative, and
certainly, there's different ways to look at it. and-
instead of just sending the district into these people that watch it and they get confused about what it even means. Oh, does that mean that the whole district's failing?
All right, so let's
Sure.
look at,
Anything that we needed? Okay.
we should have,
So I sent this.
will we have it, we won't be here April 4th. We have that work session on Tuesday of that week, right? Yes. Will it be available by April 2nd? No, probably not.
I'm just trying to think that through. So we have spring break the week of the 18th. The prior Friday is when the window closes, the 14th.
Okay.
So yeah, I mean, April 2nd will be fine.
That's our work session. What's on that agenda?
And then we're meeting with the sheriff.
But
and
that's a
maybe,
shade meeting.
No, not that one. That one will be open.
I have a shade meeting down for that date,
For the 7th?
for the 2nd.
If the external operator for Evergreen would be available to attend that work session to share the scrimmage data with us, that would be very,
Better than having him come to the board meeting?
It's on my calendar as well.
it
Doesn't
doesn't,
say what it's
that part
for.
doesn't matter, but
I thought we were going into a shade meeting. Mine says school security.
At 11.
At 11.
At 11, so we have 2 meetings.
There's an administrative briefing that works as
Right.
April the 2nd, you have annual review of alternative learning, code of student conduct, LTI discussion, district staffing plan, self-help updates, rezoning, and there is a shade meeting.
Okay, but also Sheriff Woods is meeting with us on, I believe it's that day at 9 o'clock.
At
Okay,
9
so
o'clock.
we do have that at 9.
That's when they're
Okay,
here.
yep. Okay.
So maybe could we move the rezoning?
Given,
Well, if we want to,
Yeah, you have the SRO update on March 7th. Share it.
oh, March 7th, okay, that's what it is. All right, I'm getting there.
I'm saying April 2nd. Is there enough time with all that on the agenda to add this?
On that
For the
Tuesday?
second?
April 2nd?
Yeah, I just hate to go further into April to get
Yeah.
this data.
Yeah, if you can get it.
You can do it.
And this is Evergreen? Or
No,
it's
this
everybody?
will be all the
Okay,
data.
so
So that's why I'm
it-
saying, do we
April.
need to move something off the agenda?
You might, I don't have it in front of me then. Do we want to move the rezoning? Because the code of conduct we need to do MTI. How about we move the MTI discussion and the
Okay.
rezoning maybe today? And then just.
Because we're each individually meeting with Mr.
Hurley.
Hurley.
Right, it would be great to get that information after we've met with him. But if it has to be put off a little bit.
Well, maybe the
have other
MPI,
things
maybe
that
if we move
are
the
pressing.
MPI discussion,
So move the
there'll be,
MTI.
there'll be,
There's not much time on there. Do you know how long that MTI discussion is?
That was going to be lengthy.
Lengthy?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's go
How
for
long is yours
it.
gonna be?
We cover it pretty quickly in the board meeting, but obviously I mean, we can expand on it, but I don't think more than 30, 45 minutes. I mean, if we're
depends on
covering
the
all
questions
schools.
we have.
Yeah.
So we just,
And the discussion.
Okay.
So that's everybody on April 2nd, including an Evergreen
Yeah.
external operator update. Now, do we keep them on the 26th work
Board.
session, or 26th board meeting, 12th board meeting?
12.
Yeah, I'm
Do
getting
you
closer
still want them on the
now,
12th,
yeah.
Nancy?
So the 12th.
You still want the external operators at the board meeting?
Or can they
too?
just do it all on the 2nd, if they can finish it all up on the 2nd?
If they can finish it off on the 2nd, it's fine.
Okay. So for what we,
So,
I'll make a note.
so for
I
the
was going to bring
12th,
everything to you except for elementary academic data, but then it sounds like maybe 2-3 weeks later I'll come back with all schools again after a quarter 3 QSMA.
at a workshop.
So you still want both times? Okay. Okay.
Because you're doing middle and high school on the 12th
Mm-hmm.
and attendance and discipline on the 12th.
Correct.
And that's what we're asking for on the 12th.
Right.
On a,
Yeah.
at a board meeting?
Yes.
How's that?
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you so much. Thank you all so much. We appreciate it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, so now we're going to move forward with our ESD roundtable discussion with Dr. Alves.
Actually looked a little more informal for this
I know, it's not a
discussion
very round
because
table.
I don't want people to be intimidated to talk. This is not a,
Good morning, Madam Chair, board members, Dr. Mayor. Thank you for allowing me to come and share information about ESE. Today's presentation is going to be a very broad understanding of requirements that go along with implementing our special programs. It's going to talk about our population. It's going to have specific data for Marion County, our strategic improvement plan that we have in place, and a very broad coverage of a lot of things. ESE is very wide-reaching, and it would be impossible to go through every single law and every single piece, so I'm going to do my very best to give you a good understanding. Your packet is organized with the actual PowerPoint, as well as any of the supporting documents that go with what I'm going to discuss. For example, if I quote a Senate bill, you have a full copy of the Senate bill, but I'm going to hit the highlights out of that Senate bill in the PowerPoint. So I just wanted you to know what you have. It's really not as big as what it looks like, but I wanted you to have all that information. So special education law. This is where we really get started. This is the historical timeline of special education law and the creation and evolution of how special education has started and where we are today. Our first real law that you may have heard of is Public Law 94-142. It was the very first federal law that talked about students with special needs being able to have a right for education in schools, and a right to procedural safeguards, parental rights, all of the kind of things that go with that. That law has now had multiple evolutions. The Individuals with Disabilities Education Act replaced that, and now it has been reauthorized in the 97 to 2004 time range. As you can see, IDEA has not been reauthorized since 2004, and what I am hearing at this point is that it is going to be in process of reauthorizing again. So that means that within the next 2 to 3 years, you can see it took from 97 to 2004 for the federal government to actually completely reauthorize this. So we know it is going to be a long process, but we need to be prepared that there will be rule changes and law changes. And then the final piece is the Florida rules. The way the IDEA works is everyone in the United States functions under Individuals with Disability Education Act, or I call it IDEA. And then states can then have laws that are more strict than what the IDEA says. So in Florida, we have laws that are stricter than what the federal government says. And so we have to be making sure at all times we're balancing what the Florida law is, as well as making sure we're meeting the letter of the federal law. This comes into play sometimes when parents move here from other states. Some states only use federal law. So when they come down, they think they know where they are, but they don't know the Florida laws and statutes that go with it. So there are 6 major principles in IDEA, and those focus on the students' rights and responsibilities of the public schools. And those categories are free and appropriate public education, appropriate evaluations of students that we suspect may have a disability, the individual educational plan, and that access to FAPE. FAPE is sometimes used instead of free and appropriate public education. That's a very long, wieldy term. So people say FAPE most frequently. It talks about least restrictive environment, parental participation in all of the things we do, and the procedural safeguards. So we're going to be going over each one of those. In the reauthorization, the emphasis was placed on providing all students with the same access to the same curriculum as every student, whether they're a student with special needs or they're not. It also focused on early intervention, greater accountability, and improved outcomes, post-secondary employment. We're going to be talking about what we're doing here in Marion County to address that. So free and appropriate public education is the right of all children in the United States. It guarantees them since 1973 to be able, in the Rehab Act as well as IDEA, that they have a right to a public education at no expense to the parent. The next piece that they talk about is the least restrictive environment. The LRE, this one is always touchy. People think LRE means regular classroom. That may be the LRE for an individual student. But there are some students that the least restrictive environment is actually a smaller class or a specialized class with more intensive instruction. It may mean that the student is not on their home school campus. It may be for that child that they need to be in a separate location on the campus rather than being in the main building. All of that is based individually for students, and it is not a one-size-fits-all. It does not mean inclusion, but it always must be considered. We can't say LRE means they're fully included in Gen Ed. That is one component of LRE, and so that is a piece. The next slide talks about all the things that we do under that least restrictive environment. So you can have students that are in regular class, and they're receiving, as you see, the collaborative teaching things on the side. They could be getting co-teaching, support facilitation. They could be getting general differentiated instruction. They could be getting their services through a small group. They could be getting those in a special class, or even the most restrictive is for a student who is hospitalized homebound, and they are just not able to be at school. They're too ill to be at school. Oh, I think I hit the wrong button. There it goes. Okay, so we look at the continuum of what is least to most in an LRE. So the least restrictive, when you look at this, would be regular classroom. The most restrictive is a residential school or being on hospital homebound. Currently, here in Marion County, we have every option all the way down to residential. We do not have residential placements within Marion County. We do have an all-day special school, and that would be Hillcrest. Hillcrest is considered a special school. Hillcrest should be considered our most restrictive placement. It's that those students cannot be served in any way other than being at Hillcrest. And that's an individual team decision which the parent is part of when we come to that decision.
Is that the same with Maplewood, for the elementary
No,
children?
it is not. Maplewood has very similar programs as other schools in our county. And I think at the inception of Maplewood, many years ago, it was looked at that way, but the district has evolved since then. And so we'll talk about what each school currently has and what kind of classes they currently have as we move through the presentation. Okay. So procedural safeguards. You have a copy of the procedural safeguards. It is a lengthy document. This is given to the parents at many times. It's required when we're inviting them to a meeting. It's required to share with folks. There's an entire process of when we give that information. Excuse me. The thing about the procedural safeguards,
Can I ask you something? Is this like standard for everybody in the state, or is this our
standard
own
for everybody in
form?
the state. This is not something we have any control over. This is
So
a
this is
state
printed out
document.
statute or someplace?
That is
Okay.
that is a document provided to us by Florida Department of Education. Okay, so in the procedural safeguards, it gives parents a lot of rights, and sometimes schools get frustrated. For example, if a parent does not give us consent to evaluate their child, we cannot evaluate their child. So if the parent says, no, I don't want my child tested, I want you to continue to work with him and provide interventions and do things in the classroom, but I don't want my child tested for special education, that parent has the right to say that. And we have to help those students in the classroom because we're not going to try to take that parent's right away to be able to evaluate their child. They also have to give us consent to place them in a program for the very first time. It's consent for initial placement in a program. Parent says, yes, I want you to do the testing. We do the testing. We share all of our intervention data. We share all of our testing data. And that parent says, I'm sorry, I don't want my child placed in special education. We say, we understand. We need to share with you that you're giving up your rights, these procedural rights that fall under ESD, but you have that right as a parent. Okay, so they have those rights. They have a right to review their records at any time they want. They have a right, if they don't agree with something we've done, they can ask for mediation. They can ask for, they can file a state complaint. They can request due process. Most times, we can come to consensus through a mediation process or a facilitated IEP process that we never have to go to that length because we are working all for the same reason and working for the students. We do have several folks that work in the ESD department who are trained in advanced facilitated IEP, and they are ones that we call on who aren't part of whatever's going on in that school setting to facilitate those IEPs if that's an issue. But the final piece is that it ensures our parents are equal partners in our decisions and the things we do. And they are a very critical point. Discipline. This is a section that I need to point out. Students who have disabilities have different rights than students who are in a general program who do not have a disability. Mm-hmm. They have a right to have what's called a manifestation determination meeting. And that if a student has had a disciplinary offense, and that offense is something that would have had another student going to a more restrictive placement, that student is eligible for a manifestation. In other words, we're trying to figure out if the behavior the child exhibited is a direct manifestation or directly tied to their current disability and the disability that we have already documented through our IEP process. If it isn't a manifestation, a student with a disability can be disciplined the same as other students in the district, with the exception of they cannot exceed more than 10 days cumulative of out-of-school suspension
In a year?
in a year. And that is from, it goes through the entire extended school year process. So it's a calendar year. So if a student would be matriculating, say, to 8th grade, and that rolls on July 1, if they're in extended school year or a summer school program and they're suspended during that summer program, that does carry into the next school year. It is not 10 days at every individual school that they happen to be at. It is 10 days cumulative. The one thing that is difficult for all school districts, not just Marion County, is we have a transient population. So we have students moving from other districts. We may not always know, disciplinary records do not always come with students. So we may not know that a student has 3 days out of school suspension from Seminole County, and they show up and they get 8 days of suspension here. Now we've gone over our 10 cumulative days. And that's when we have to get into, do we need to provide some other type of services to make up for the fact that they were out? They can, though, if it is a manifestation, and this is very hard, and I'm telling you the law, I'm not giving you an idea of whether I agree with this law or I don't, but the way that the law is written is if it is a manifestation of their disability, they are not to be disciplined. They will return back to the same classroom as anyone else, with the exception is if they bring drugs, weapons, or serious bodily injury. Those students can still be alternatively placed with services for up to 45 days. The one thing we can't do with students with disabilities is we can never exclude them from school without services. And that is federal and state. So even if the state changed something, it's still federal law, so we would not be able to change that.
So you couldn't put them into alternative, you only can do 45 days, you couldn't do a year?
It would depend on, it depends. And the one thing that's hard about ESD is there's never a one-size-fits-all answer. The first word in the IDEA is individual. So each situation is individual, and based on the facts of that individual situation, it could be possible that they brought a weapon to school, and that is one of our big three. It may be that the team, including the parent, agree that going to an alternative school for a year is appropriate. But there isn't a one-size-fits-all answer, and I wish there was, but there isn't.
Otherwise, it's just 45 days.
That is what's called an interim alternative educational placement, and we do 45-day placements. It means that in the interim of when we're trying to figure out whether it was a manifestation, whether it wasn't a manifestation, all those pieces, you can do that. But they have to have services. I hit the wrong button again, I'm sorry. Okay, so that's the end of the first section of the overall. Do you have specific questions?
Just a clarification, what makes Hillcrest so unique is that we don't have any general education students.
You are correct. You are correct, and we'll talk about that when we get into our actual data from how we're being ranked by the state. That is one component that is always going to impact our ability to get points in a certain area, and I'll go into that more in depth when we get there. Okay?
I have a question since we're talking about the manifestation and stuff. As a district, what are we doing to protect the other students and teachers when these students fall under the disability and have the manifestation? So what are we doing to protect?
What we're doing, Mr. Ellers, I think Mr. Ellers and I is here. We work very closely together so that when a student with a disability has had an offense and has to go back to his school, we sit down together, we problem solve together. What supports do they need at the school? Is there another classroom that is appropriate? Do we need different supports in that classroom? Do we need to provide additional training? What do we have to do? And once again, it's individualized to the situation and to the student. So we work very, very closely together. Mr. Ellers doesn't process packets of students with disabilities that they're looking at expulsion without bringing them to me. And if I know something, I bring it to him and we sit down together and problem solve. So there isn't a one answer for
Is the
that.
parent involved in that conversation?
Not in the initial, when we're trying to figure out if they met the criteria. We have the parent is involved in the manifestation meeting. So the parent is there, they know whether it's determined as a manifestation or not. We look at the disciplinary packet, and then those recommendations go back to the school, and that goes through the schools working with the parents to go to that next level.
My question though is if there's a school and say there's a classroom that has, several students that are getting injured, beat up or other students are being injured, like, at what point is it okay for the teacher, principal, or whoever's in there to say, we need extra support? And are we doing a good job of making sure that they get the extra support or behavior specialist or the techs or whatever? Are we doing our due diligence to make sure that everybody is protected? That's what I'm
That is
thinking.
always our first concern, is that everyone is protected. We've talked about the hubs. That's one of the problems with having the students spread all over the district. There's not enough staff to send a behavior tech or a behavior specialist when they're spread all over. So when we get into those discussions, that's one of the reasons that this will work in a better way to provide more services for kids.
So
One thing I can
I got
interject.
a question.
Yes.
You have enough behavioral techs?
We have enough techs. We do not have enough behavior specialists.
What's the
There's a
difference?
difference between tech. We're going to get into that
No,
too,
no,
but I can
no.
give it to you right now if you'd
Please,
like.
Please.
Okay, a behavior tech is a person who has a high school diploma, and they receive training to be a technician. They are basically a paraprofessional working with behavior. That's what a tech is. A behavior specialist is someone who has a minimum of a bachelor's degree, and they are working toward or already are certified in applied behavior analysis. The figuring out of why behavior is happening and what do we do to have them access whatever the reason is that they're behaving the way they are in a positive manner instead of a negative manner. And so that is something that we have 7 behavior specialists for the entire district. So when the students are spread all over the district, it's very, very difficult for them to be able to be in each one of those settings. Okay? So go ahead and...
Is it because of the staffing plan we don't have enough? So am I hearing that we need more?
There are not currently more than 7 on the staffing plan. When we get to the ESD staffing plan for next year, I have worked to ask to have a total of 20, and they will be paid out of the IDEA grant. They are not going to be coming out of district funds. They'll be coming out of the IDEA grant. So even though there's an increase in staff, it won't be impacting the district budget. It'll be coming out of the IDEA funds that we receive that flow from the federal government through the state and to us.
So what happens with the IDA grant if it changes and what they allocate them?
I have my allocation, and I have to work within that allocation. I will have to cut something else in order to keep them.
Now, is this something, in the past, have we had more specialists than we have now?
You know, I cannot, I believe you did, but that was, when I was a behavior specialist here in Marion County, we had 3. I was one of 3.
How long ago?
I left. I was a behavior specialist here between 2002 and 2004, and we had 3. Then when I left, it increased, and we did have an increase, and then somewhere along the line, prior to my arrival, it was cut back. So that has been cut back. I'm in the process of trying to bring it back to get those intensive services, because we are seeing students that are returning district-wide, statewide. We're seeing students with more significant behaviors in our schools. So we have to be able to intervene in that piece of it. Since we're on the topic, the other thing that I'm asking in my IDEA grant is to add 3 other positions, which would be something called a school intervention therapist. And that is to provide mental health counseling to students in the emotional behavior disorder programs. And I'm looking to add 1 in each of the 3 areas. That is something also that would be under the IDEA grant. It is not something that would impact district funds. And I have been working diligently to make sure that that fits within the IDEA grant.
What will you have to take out of the IDEA to pay for that? What do you trade off?
I didn't bring all my allocation things because I wasn't planning an allocation discussion. I can have that discussion with you because I have
No,
it.
I'm just curious, like, it's not off the top of your head, like 2 secretaries, or, I mean, like, what do you...
We're cutting different things like buying new computers every 3 years.
Gotcha.
And we're
Okay.
looking at whether or not we need to, what type of intervention model do we need to use? Are we looking at an intervention model that costs us $150,000, or can we get the same bang for our buck out of one that costs less?
And you, instead of having all the computers and all the programs, use some warm bodies for a change that can really communicate with these people.
My focus is to get direct services to students. That is going to be my focus. When I come to present my staffing plan to you, that is what mine is direct services to students, not direct services to the ESD department. Currently, the ESD department has not filled 3 or 4 open clerk positions. We're doing away with those. We can do with less clerks. We need with more people working with kids in the
Thank you.
classroom.
Thank you. That gives me a highlight of kind of what we're trading off, and that sounds good. Thank you.
Okay.
You said school intervention therapists?
Therapists.
Therapists, okay.
And in that, I would like them to be a licensed clinical social worker or a licensed mental health counselor working with students. So once that approval is all in, then we would want to move forward with that to have those services for the kids.
So they'll be working directly with the students? It's
Absolutely.
not just somebody that's like, oh, they're going to pop in and then
No.
never see them again?
No, absolutely not.
Okay.
No, the behavior specialist, my hope would be, well, my plan would be for them to be full-time on a campus that either has an emotional behavior disorder program or has a modified curriculum program for students with autism. Okay, so there would actually be those folks on campus.
That sounds good. Okay. And it's not like this is just something new. This isn't your first rodeo.
It is
I've
not.
spoken extensively with Collier County, and you are quite highly referred here.
Thank you. Thank you. It's a good team down there as well as it's a good team here. Other questions? Okay, we'll move on. Okay, so let's talk about things specifically in Florida, because this is where things are a little different than what you might hear if you've come from another state, if you've not always lived here. There are categories that a student may be eligible for services under this exceptionality. And you're going to hear me through the entire presentation use what's called person-first language. Our students are students first. They are children first. They are not their disability first. And I think it's very important that we model that language, so you're going to hear me use that language. The folks who work with me closely know that if I hear somebody say, he's autistic, or that autistic student, I will stop them, and I'll say, you mean the student with autism? Because they are a student first, they're not their disability. And they're going to rise to what we expect out of them. So I just wanted to share that. So students may have a category of learning disabled, speech impaired, language impaired, other health impaired. All of these have a specific, there's a manual. You saw the SP&P at the last. Each one of these categories is spelled out that tells exactly what a student needs to have in order to be considered as eligible for one of these programs. These are considered high incidence programs. In other words, the majority of the students in special education have this type of a disability. There are other disabilities that would be considered more low incidence. We also have emotional behavior disabilities, autism spectrum disorders, intellectual disabilities, developmentally delayed. I want to point out developmentally delayed. This one is hard, and I'm just going to be honest. In the state of Florida, developmentally delayed only goes age 3 to 5. On their 6th birthday, they have to be dismissed by law, whether they are eligible for anything else, whether the testing has been completed. We have to dismiss them. And if we don't, we get into a problem of they get reported for FTE, and we claim money on kids that we're not allowed to claim, and then we have to give money back. So we cannot let them go past their 6th birthday. I would say myself, as well as every other director I have known, has said this is a concern. Federally, you can stay developmentally delayed until age 9. And parents are coming in from other states with 8-year-olds and 7-year-olds, and their only eligibility is developmentally delayed. And in the state of Florida, we have to dismiss them. So that has been a challenge, and that's difficult. I'm just going to be totally honest. I got here, started looking at our numbers. We had 81 students on August 1st that were over the age of 6 still being served in special classes. And we had to fix that before the October FTE window because we couldn't keep them eligible. And it's heartbreaking, and we can still provide interventions, and we can still provide tiered services, but we can't, they don't have an eligibility category of a student with a disability until we get through that process. In a conference call with the state this week, they've said that they are reconsidering a change to move it to the same as federal. But we all know how slow the wheels can turn, so I don't know when that's actually going to happen, but I do know they're thinking about it. Okay. Then we have low incidence disabilities. These will be our students who are deaf, hard of hearing, visually impaired, dual sensory impaired, meaning they are deaf, hard of hearing and visually impaired, orthopedic impairment, traumatic brain injured, and then hospital homebound. Those are disabilities that are less frequent that we see, then they're considered low incidence. Any questions?
What if you have a kid that has more than one of those? How they designated?
How they what?
How are they designated?
They are, the team will decide what their primary exceptionality is, and that will be listed first on their IEP and in their eligibility information that goes to the state, and then others are secondary. What we have to get better at is a student that we have labeled as other health impaired or visually impaired. They don't need the label of developmentally delayed 2, and sometimes we've done that. If they're eligible for any other category, we don't need to put developmentally delayed unless it's speech or language only. Okay, so that's something we're working to get better at here. The state would say, why are you testing for another eligibility? They already have one. Can you provide services? Okay, all right, so we're going to move on, if you have no other questions, to what do we truly look like in Marion County? The data you're going to see may not seem like it goes together, but it is all Marion County specific data. And I want to get our data out first before we go to talk about any of the other sections. Okay? So in this slide, it shows you how the breakup is of students with disabilities in Marion County. We have 41% of our students are specific learning disabled. We have 22% of our students have speech or language impairments. That's high. That's a quarter, almost a quarter of our students are speech or language impaired.
Our ESE students?
They are considered ESE students, yes ma'am.
Or our overall population, 20?
Our overall population is...
Okay, so this is just of the...
These are all of our students with disabilities. This is the percentage under each one of these categories.
I thought you meant like the 42,000 students, it was 41%. It's not just of the disabled students.
Okay, so if you can see here, our total enrollment is 43,119. There are 6,729 students with disabilities. So if you go back, out of that 6,729, 22% of those are speech or language. Okay, 41% are learning disabled. And then you can see our low incidence population is where it should be, less than 1%. It's a very low incidence that we have those. We do have some disabilities that are a little high, and we'll look at the next graph. I'm going to switch on, and you can see the red line is the state's percentage of students with disabilities across years. Marion County is over 2% higher in identifying students with disabilities overall than the whole state. So this is something that tells me we need to look at how we're finding kids eligible. Are we following the rules specifically, or is this truly just the nature of the population of students that we have in Marion County? And there are some reasons why we might have higher numbers. We are very close to Shands. There are some families that don't want to live in Alachua County or live in a college town, but they still need to access the services of Shands and live here. That might be one reason that we have a higher number than in other districts.
So, Dr. Alves, how are you going to determine that, and will you share that data with us when you know?
We're starting with training with the ESD specialists.
Okay.
So we're going to be breaking, as that showed, our percentage We have the overall percentage. We then need to break it down further and look at the percentage of students in each disability category. For example, we already found the reason we were high, 6% developmentally delayed, was there were 81 students that should have already been dismissed. So we already found that, we've already corrected that, we're already on top of that.
Okay.
So as we are breaking it down and finding it in the areas, then we're putting things in place to take care of that. And it feels like we're doing lots of changes really fast, but all of them are based on the data and why we have to. We don't need to be asked to give money back because we had students remain in a program that they weren't eligible for.
Dr. Ellis, does every county in Florida have a separate day school
No.
like Hillcrest?
No, they do not.
So that could be
Matter of fact,
another
the
reason.
majority of districts in the state of Florida do not have a separate day school.
Would you remember that football coach that was going to assist at UF?
He was
A
the
few
head
years ago,
football
yeah.
coach.
Oh,
His
yeah,
son
he
went
had
to
put
Hillcrest.
didn't he
Yes.
enroll his son at Hillcrest and move
For
he
the
was going to live
specific
in
reason
Marion
to
for
have
that?
her.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
Yes. And so that happens. It does happen. Right now, the state is not giving any school numbers for any additional separate day schools. So if we wanted to create a new separate day school, they would not allow us, they would not give us a school number for that. And I happen to know that from personal experience in another district. So something could have changed in the last 3 years, but I don't think so.
Because it does make me wonder what an impact that has, because we've had students come from Sweden.
I know, and we're gonna talk about that in our LRE as why we're never going to hit what the state target is. And so we're going to talk about that as we move along. So inclusion in special classes. Right now, this is what we have right now. We have right now 469 pre-K students that have IEPs. We have 6,729 students that have IEPs. And then we have 2,667 students who are gifted who have what's called an educational plan. So students with educational plans in elementary school only get a plan once every 3 years. In high school, they get one every 4 years. Students with disabilities get a minimum of one IEP every year. And that's a minimum, and I would say in most cases, at least 50% we meet more than once a year.
Can I ask you a question? Some of those 2,000, 2,600 also fit into that 6,700 category as well.
Absolutely, they
Some
do.
of our gifted students
Are twice exceptional.
are twice exceptional.
We may have a student who is gifted and
A
speech
504.
or language impaired. This does not include 504. This
Oh, that does
only includes our IEP. 504 is a whole nother
Sorry.
group of students.
But do we still get extra money though for the gifted kids? Do we still get extra?
You do not get extra
No.
funding for gifted. You get extra funding for students with disabilities, and I have a whole section on how we get funded so that you can see that. 67.6% of our students are served in regular class. As we move on, you'll see the state target next year is 87%. We are nowhere near the state target. And this is one of the areas they have come to when they came to visit us in November. That was one of the things they targeted, and we'll talk about that in our strategic plan. The number that is high is that we have 22.5% of our students being served in a self-contained setting or in a special day school. That is high for the state. Most districts are not that high. And the VE self-contained model helped with this because the classrooms were on every individual campus. So it was easier for a team to move a student into that rather than moving them to a school that was not on their campus. And that is what I can tell from the data right now. But once again, I can only look at the data since I've been here. So the next piece is federal graduation rate. I'm bringing this in now. I know it doesn't seem like it fits, but it is because it's Marion County's data. This is where each one of our schools are when it comes to the federal graduation rate. And we can see the state target right now was 62.3% for 2017-18. Some of our schools are meeting that graduation rate. We still have a couple sites that aren't, and we're working actively through our strategic plan to make changes there. This is the way it is calculated so that you can see how it's calculated. For students with disabilities, the target was, we were at 60.3%. We've now moved, for the state's target is 62.3. We're at 68.3. We're doing well with that. But there is a difference when schools are talking. The federal graduation rate is based on the cohort of kids that graduate with a standard diploma within 4 years. The standard graduation rate is the number of kids who graduate with a standard diploma. So it's the difference between graduating in 4 years or graduating, it takes you 6 years to get your standard diploma. You can do that, but it impacts your federal graduation rate. The federal graduation rate is where we earn points in our designation to give us points to move forward. And the dropout rate, this is difficult. The dropout rate is based on the number of students who were enrolled and withdrawn with a dropout code during the school year. A student can count in the dropout rate more than once if they start school and don't finish. So that is something that is an issue with students with disabilities. It also, when we are figuring our graduation rate as a district, they look at the cohort as the students with disabilities who entered 9th grade with an IEP. So if you have a student who is speech or language only, and they are on a consultation quarterly for speech or language when they enter 9th grade, if they are dismissed prior to graduation, they count against the students with disability graduation rate because they are in the denominator but not in the numerator. So that's one of the things.
That doesn't seem quite fair.
Right.
It doesn't. So our goal is to get our kids where they can be out of special education and not need it, but we're penalized in this way. So
Wow.
we are working with the speech language pathologists, which we'll have another discussion about that at another time, but we are working with them in that if a student has been on quarterly consultation for the last 3 years, we should be looking at dismissing them prior to them entering high school in that cohort, not because it's for us, but necessarily it's not right for the student either. Okay, so that's some basic information there. Questions? None? Okay.
She's doing a great job.
Now we're going to get into the meat. The LEA determination and how we are evaluated. There is a document in your packet called the LEA profile. It is published annually. Looks like this. I'm not going to go through every single word of this document. We will be getting a new one in June. So it has all the information. It helps us know where we need to work. It talks about the number, it breaks it down, the number of students with disability by race, ethnicity. It breaks it down by information on parent surveys. We have information on regular graduation rate, federal graduation rate. All of that's included, and we use all of that data to help us make decisions. My first week that I was on the job, I pulled the entire team together and we did strategic planning. And we pulled out that data as well as the next piece of data I'm going to share with you to start guiding the direction that we were going to move so that we could make changes in this district. This is called an LEA determination. The next slides I want to just give you a precursor. Take a deep breath and breathe. Initially it's not going to look good, but we are moving in the right direction, and we may look like we've lost points in some area, which we have, but we've gained points in other areas. As I shared with you in the past, this is lag data. Some of it is lag data, some of it's real-time data. And so the things that we can't impact are the things that happened over the last 2 years. So I can't go back and fix the numbers or what happened over the last 2 to 3 years. Can't do that. So we focused on the things. I'm just giving you a precursor so it'll be, okay. We are currently in the needs intervention stage. There is one step lower than that, and that is needs significant intervention. We are projected to go up to needs assistance, which is going up a whole category. Still don't want to be needs assistance. The goal is by with the end of 3 years, we're in needs expectations and needs requirements. But that's where we are now. A district can earn 8 compliance points and 9 performance points. So this is the overall of where we are. You can see that starting in 14 and 15, we were in needs requirements. We dropped to needs assistance, and this year we dropped all the way back to needs intervention. Needs intervention can happen if you've been in needs assistance for 4 consecutive years, or that you are in the 4 to 7 point bracket. Now, we're projecting to be at 9 points. We are not sure, and I'm being perfectly honest, whether they're gonna look at us and say you've been in 4 consecutive years because we're in needs intervention this year. They may leave us in needs, assistance, or because it would have been 4 consecutive years that we've been below. But it won't be because we're not making progress.
Can I ask you something? When we were in needs requirements in 2015, that is a big range. From 13 points to 17 points. Where were we at back then?
I don't have that information. I could probably find it for you, but I don't know where we were at that time.
Would you do that?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
It's kind of like, were we at the
What the total number of
barely
points?
median requirement, or
Were we barely? Okay, I understand what you're saying. We're like at 13 points, or were we at 16, 17, 18 points? The category above this is meets requirements. Meets requirements is 13 to 17. You can actually earn up to 21 points. So they've changed it a little bit over the years, but I don't know exactly where we were, but we will find that out for you. Okay? Our goal was to make sure we didn't fall and end up in need substantial intervention. That was our goal this year, is to at least maintain, and we have actually gained some points back. So this is how they take a look at this, and you can see clearly whether there was a finding, whether there was, and the finding means that we didn't earn the point, or whether or not we earned the point. So last year, as you can see, we earned points in the 2017 Auditor General Report. It goes back a year, that we did not have any findings. There was no disproportionate representation in special education. This one's really important. It's called, in terms out there, CEIS, Coordinated Early Intervening Services. This would mean that more than one minority category was being identified for special education at a higher rate than others in any other category. And if that happens, then you have to set aside a large percentage of that IDEA budget that you get that can only be spent on early intervening services to make sure that we're not doing that. We are consistently good in that section. The one that we continue to have difficulty with is the State Performance Indicator 11, which is that at least 95% of students with parental consent were evaluated within 60 days. That is an area that we have not met, and historically, I have not been able to see that we were meeting that, and we'll talk about some of the things we've done through our strategic plan to try to make a difference for that. And then the last one is one that we have difficulty with quite frequently, and this year we have not. We're back on track, but it's submission of valid, reliable, and timely data. And this one, I'll be perfectly honest, this is why we push so hard to get the SP&P on the board session, because that is timely submission. What we sent to you through the work session, it's going to come up for public hearing at the next meeting, that is the policy that the state says we're working under right now. So we're going to be into the end of March, and we don't have it approved for right now. And that's something that is the way it's set up in Marion County. Other districts that I've worked in don't go through this process. So we have to work really hard, because it is a requirement here, to get these things on as soon as possible in the work session, as soon as it's approved, so that we can move forward and not lose points in that area.
So how do other districts do it? Does it not come before their board for approval?
It does not. It comes under consent agenda, and only consent agenda. Because the document primarily is what the state requires us to put in. There's very little information that we can put in as our own, because it has to hit state and federal law. So because of that, they send it to the attorney. The attorney looks at the areas that the district was able to fill in blanks, and then sends it for recommendation for the superintendent, for Dr. Mayer to sign, and then it would go in under consent agenda.
Is there a board policy that says that's the way we have to do it?
Marion County incorporated that document into its policy and requires it to come back every so often. So because you have it built into your policy, it therefore has to undergo rulemaking.
So can we make an
You can amend
amendment?
your policy and remove it from
How long has that
incorporation
been
and then,
How long has it been like that?
since I've been here, I don't know how when it was amended.
And the thing that is difficult with this document is it comes up every 3 years for complete renewal. And then every year, it opens again for certain sections. And so that's when it gets, so that individual certain section, even though it's a 3-year policy you went through last year, it didn't get approved until after I was here in June for the year before. So those are the pieces that are pieces that I'm glad we're having this, so you all can have those kind of discussions to help us not get caught in this cycle that is not of any of our doing.
We need to look at that policy and I think we need that amendment, because if that's,
I mean, that's a point that we should be able to easily get back. And that's something that's within our control to get back. So that's just something, I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on it, but I wanted you to be aware of it.
That's top of mind.
But you can see there's 4 areas. We did get points last year. For the previous year, that 95% of the IEPs were compliant. Last school year's lab data, they were not compliant. And so we're going to be losing that point for next year. And then the other one is the compliance was corrected within 1 year, the lack of compliance. When I arrived, Dr. Mayer and I received back-to-back within 2 weeks approval of our compliance. They finally found us compliant for the 15-16 year, and within 2 to 3 weeks, we received the compliance for the previous year. So that all happened in the end of June, 1st of July after I got here. So we are going to lose that point because the previous year's non-compliance was not settled with the state within that calendar year. It was into the second calendar year. Those are the things we have tightened up that cannot happen, and there's no excuse for us to have that happen. Okay? The other area, now this is where we're excited because we had 0 points in this area last year, and we targeted in on these things that we can change, and we've now earned 4 points back. And so that's where we are. You can see but we're still getting hit with lag data. So the 15-16 federal uniform graduation rate was at or above the state target. It wasn't in 15-16. So we're still getting penalized for what happened in 15-16. But the 16-17, we did meet it, and we had improvement by I think it's at or above the state rate. We actually made that. We had a team of folks this summer. When I first got here in June, you have until the end of June to clean things up. We went and looked at each individual student that didn't graduate in May and started working with ways to help them be able to graduate and be on time. So we worked on that very diligently. Michelle Oman was one of the key people, and so was Chris Miller in getting that done and really tearing it apart. They're both coordinators for our district. So you can see our dropout rate. We were able to gain a point there. The state recognized this and took this off of our monitoring visit. They said, we don't have to talk to you about that. You don't have to have a plan for that because you already have a plan, obviously. So we were happy about that. The LRE, as you can see, we are still going the wrong direction. And that is an area that is a concern for us. And it is something we're working on diligently, and we'll show you in the strategic plan piece of some of the things that we're doing. Questions?
Can we take a 5-minute break?
We're going to recess for 5 minutes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Are you having appointments, so you're leaving?
Okay, so we're going to go into now the strategic improvement plan, and this is something that we've developed within our department to help guide us in the direction that we're going. You have a copy of the entire strategic plan. I'm not going to go through it word for word for you, but you do have a copy of it. You'll see that many things in there are marked completed, because we meet quarterly to review these goals. The strategic plan is a very fluid document. If we see something that's new, we will add it to the plan. We aren't just going to keep working on what's here and not add something in. So if we need to add something in, if something is completed, we mark it completed, but we come back and review quarterly. We presented this strategic plan to the Department of Ed when they came in on their site visit November 27th. They were here for 3 days. The state approved of this strategic plan. So everything that's in this plan is what we're working off of, is what we've presented to the Department of Education, and they have approved what we have in the plan. So I just want you to understand where we're coming from with this. And we were pleased to see that Dr. Monica Vieira-Tirado, who is the Bureau Chief for Exceptional Student Education, actually came to our site visit. And she was one of the ones who was really pleased with the direction we were going and how we were doing it with a systematic approach and not just shooting from the hip. So she was pleased with that.
Good.
The strategic plan, okay, I'm going to go back here. It's listed as the state performance plan is SPP. The document we just talked about that we need to revise is SP and P. So it gets confusing. So when you look at it, you have to make sure there's not an and. If it's an and, it's the document that I've already brought that we looked at. The state performance plan are the indicators that gave us the LEA ranking, that determination. So one of the things in the state performance plan, we were found lacking in indicator 1 and 2. That was increasing the federal graduation rate, decreasing the dropout rate. So there are several things that are within the strategic plan that we have done in order to address this. We've looked at Check and Connect, which is a mentoring program that we have at targeted schools. That's in place this year. We are doing something we've never done before. We've done credit recovery for all students, but what consistently principals said to me when I met with them in June and July was that students with disabilities aren't getting to those credit recovery programs in the month of June, and they can't do it without ESE support. So what we have done is we are looking at an extended school year. It will be using the same materials for seniors who are within a credit and half of graduating, that we can get them to a site to do credit recovery between the 1st of June and the last day of June, where if they can get those credits, they would be able to graduate on time. Now, if we had lots of time and we could do it the way we really would like to roll it out, we would start it with freshmen. And we would hit our freshmen, and so they catch up the 1 or 2 credits they're behind. We're doing this as a true pilot because we don't want to put a whole lot of resources and money into it if it isn't going to work. If our students are not going to come, which we can't make them come, we don't want to have overextended, because then we don't have those funds to use for something else in the future. But we're targeting, because of where we are, we're trying to get those kids to graduate and count in that standard graduation rate. So that's one of the things we're doing right now. We're doing continuous training for ESE specialists. And we are training not on just the stuff that I showed you at the beginning, on the categories and where we're digging deep and saying, this is where we have an issue, what do we need to do to fix it? And we are teaching and training on a monthly basis. In the first semester, we met every other week. So twice a month, we met with the ESE specialists. This year, we have not had the level of turnover in ESE specialists that we've had in the previous 2 years. So we're actually starting, and every one of them signed asking to come back next year. So that is a huge, huge benefit for us. We have a partnership with Project 10, and through the Check and Connect came through what's called an SPDG grant, State Performance Development Grant.
Gosh, these initials.
And all these initials. And so that grant allowed us, we get money annually, and for over 3 years. One of the things we did was we hired a transition coordinator. She is part-time, she's all transition, all secondary. That would be Michelle Oman, but half of her salary is paid from this grant. So we have been able to incorporate that to target where we're behind in transition. And then we're utilizing an early warning system to identify our students at risk at a much earlier rate. The other thing that the state performance plan was looking at was increasing a regular class placement. That's indicator 5. That's where we were at 68%, the states, or 63%, states at 83%. When you have a school like Hillcrest, where there is no way for students to be able to be integrated with non-disabled peers, you have to take that percentage of students off the top of those that are in the least restrictive environment. So in order to make progress, we have to make progress with our other students. And that is an area that is a real challenge. This is where we are focused in how we can get more students into the general curriculum and the general classroom. And one of the ways that we talked about with the state was to develop our specialized hub programs. I'm going to show you where units currently are because we already have these classes. They're already labeled these things. They're just not hubbed in a location. Okay, so I'm going to show you that as we move on. But what the important thing is, and I said this to the bureau chief, Monica Vieira-Tirado, and I said, I know this will sound counterintuitive to create a hubbed site when we're trying to focus on least restrictive environment and getting more students in a general classroom. But what I shared with her is that when you have a VE classroom and you have students who have intellectual disabilities and students with emotional behavior disabilities and maybe students who are just reading 2 grade levels below, all in the same classroom, it's very difficult for a teacher or for a school to be able to see which kids really can benefit for spending more time out in the general curriculum because they're dealing with so many different things in the room. So once the programs are hubbed, we can put more intensive services in those hubs, and the students who are still in a VE self-contained, then we can get our state partners, the Florida Inclusion Network, to come in and help our schools and help us train how to get them to spend more time in the general classroom. So we've got to fix one problem before we can actually get to the bottom of getting more kids out into general classrooms. And she agreed completely. She said, if you have got kids and you're trying to do a spray and pray kind of method, and you run here, and then you run here, and then you run there, you're never going to get the intensity of services that you need that is going to make the true change for kids. And the only way you can do that, unless you are a district that is so wealthy that you can afford, all these people at every single school site, is to have your classes more hubbed together and have a plan of how you're going to staff that and have that be a consistent plan, not just that this school called and complained or this school did that. We have a plan of how we're rolling it out. And then we look at individual circumstances to determine if somebody needs more staff, more support, and we do it in a process rather than just having people run all over the district. Oh my gosh, they need me at East Marion today. Oh, but I have to be at Denellen. You're running from one side of the district to the other. So we're paying a lot of money for people to drive in the same day from one side of the county to the other, when we could do something different that would be more cost effective and better for kids. So that's where we are. The next piece is the 60-day timeline. We plan to update the policies next year to talk about our evaluations that we're doing to be focused on those that we have gained consent for and that we're working toward program eligibility. Marion County has historically done something called consult testing. And they get consent and they do consult testing and it doesn't lead to eligibility. And it's a great concept, but if we can't meet our 60-day timeline, we're going to have to step back and look at something different. So that's one of the things. We're doing more training for our staff. We're working with psych services to get there. We've restructured the pre-K evaluation team. That also requires a 60-day timeline. And we were bringing our psychologist in once or twice a month to do testing. Well, we were missing the timeline because our psychology team was coming in. So we've restructured that team to make that move a little faster. That team now has a speech-language pathologist. It has an ESE program specialist. It has an ESD staffing specialist, the diagnostician, all on one team. So it's like a one-stop shop and we don't have to worry about that lag time. We also have created a 60-day timeline for our district. If you get consent on this day, based on our school calendar, this is your 60-day timeline, so that it's very clear for everyone. And then the last one is something we'll be doing for next year's calendar committee, and this is important for you guys to understand why we're asking this. The 60-day timeline is 60 calendar days, not 60 days that a student's in attendance. The only exception is over winter break, spring break, those kind of built-in holidays. However, when we build the calendar that says spring break starts on Monday, March 18th, that means Saturday and Sunday count in the 60-day timeline. And it ends on Friday, that means the next Saturday and Sunday count in the timeline. So if we start saying that our spring break starts end of day Friday and doesn't end until beginning of day Monday, we've gained 4 days back that we've lost in the way we currently have our calendar built. So those are things we're going to be working with, and so you understand when we come forward next year and ask for this, this is why. It gives us more days to get this actual testing done. Okay? Now, the only place that doesn't count is if the family or the parent fails to produce the child for testing. So that happens sometimes in pre-K. They go through the pre-K Florida Diagnostic Learning Resource Center fiddlers. They go through their child find process. They say the student meets the screening criteria, needs to be tested, they get consent. Then that child who's 3, their parent never brings them to school for testing. They won't schedule a testing. We can put a code in that says parent failed to produce for testing, and that does not impact our 60-day timeline. But that is really the only place that happens. Questions on that? The strategic plan is a lot more in depth than that, but I didn't want to take an extensive amount of time on that piece of it. Okay, you're good. Okay, so the next section is transitioning for students who are 18 to 21. So Florida statutes changed several years ago, and this was, some people understood it, some didn't, whatever, but no longer can a student just stay in school till they're 22. We have told parents for as long as I can remember, don't worry, they have till 22 to graduate from high school. Don't worry. They were on a special diploma, many of them. Well, the state did away with special diploma, and I believe it's 5 years ago now. The state did away with special diploma. Every single student is on standard diploma. Everyone, even our students at Hillcrest, are on a standard diploma. The way they get the standard diploma is through access points. So those students will be taking Access Algebra 1, Access Biology. They are required to take these same courses as any other student in high school.
Our Hillcrest students?
Yes, ma'am. And they must access it through access points. That changed statewide 5 years ago. Okay? Now, don't worry, we're getting there.
Genius
But it is a huge change. But what I'm seeing your reaction is that you all didn't know it either. And that's the thing that we need to have this communication and open so people understand this. This isn't something that Dr. Alvey said we needed to do. This is state law that happened 5 years ago that we hadn't caught up with. And so we're catching up with it, and we're really on top of it. And 4 years ago, Marion County got on board. The law changed 5 years ago. So we had an issue at Hillcrest where the students in the first cohort did not take the courses that they were supposed to take as freshmen. They were still taking special diploma courses. So that impacted our graduation rate. Typically, we would have 20 students approximately at Hillcrest defer. This year they have a class of 40 students being looked at for deferral of receipt of their diploma because we're catching up with that year. So that has impacted us on some of that lag data that we can't go back and fix. All we can do is go forward. So where we are is that the parents and the team have to determine which path the student is on. Our students can be on an 18-credit diploma, whether they're at Hillcrest or they're a student with a learning disability at Vanguard High School. They can get an 18-credit accelerated diploma.
Do they have to have a learning disability to do the 18, or can they do it by choice?
Anybody can have that, whether it's a typical high school student, it's an accelerated diploma. Students with disabilities can as well. And it used to be that they thought, even up to 2 years ago, why it was counterintuitive. Why would you accelerate a student who's on a modified curriculum and they're not able to meet that? Well, we have different standards than other states. So we were having students move in at, say, 16 years old, and they had never taken any of the credits that we require. And so they weren't going to be able to graduate with their cohort. So that gives them the opportunity to have an 18 credit. So they can go through those same type of diploma options. The only way you will tell a difference between a student who graduates on access points or a student who graduates on general standards is to look at their transcript.
Can you explain an access point? I don't know.
An access point is the way a student accesses the curriculum. So, for example, a student who takes Algebra 1, okay, we know what Algebra 1 looks like. But when you're looking at students with significant cognitive disabilities, there are points in which they can access the concepts in Algebra 1 at different levels. And there's 3 levels that they can access it. And it may be down as far as them touching one picture and identifying one picture. Other students are doing something very similar to what's happening in the high school. So this is something that's very challenging. Next year, we as a department are purchasing supplemental materials to assist in the high schools for students who are on modified curriculum that will go along with the unique curriculum, which is our approved curriculum. We're looking at supplemental materials for Access Algebra, Access History, Access Biology, to allow the teachers not to have to create that on their own. We're trying to make this easier for our teachers and better for our kids. And it's a mindset shift. You know, we used to say, you know, I'm going to give you an example. I was at a high school the other day, and we've met now with all but one high school, so I want to get that out. Individually as a team, there's 3 of us that go. Michelle Oman goes, I go, and the area coordinator for whatever area that high school is in. And we're talking about these things with that administration, because a large group, we miss things. So we're meeting with them individually. We had this discussion. I'm going to give you an example of something that happened in Collier County. We had students on second period when it's in Algebra 1, third period they were in Access Biology, so Access Algebra 1, Access Biology, lunch. The parent came to the school and made the request and said, how is my child getting an A in Algebra and an A in Biology when I know that they go out to work halfway through second period and they don't come back until lunch? So they're not even on campus for second and third period, but they're getting a grade for Algebra and Biology. And I know they're working at the mall. Okay? That's a problem. Wouldn't we all agree that's a little bit of that's a problem? So one of the things that we've had to do is work around. The state thinks we're not doing what we're supposed to be doing because we're using terminology that, for lack of a better term, is antiquated. So we talk about CBVT, Community-Based Vocational Training. That language went out in the late 80s, early 90s, and it went to community-based instruction. Then community-based instruction went out and went to what we're going to talk about here, which is a structured work-study program. So when we talk about CBVT, the state thinks we're still back in the 80s and 90s. We're not, but they think we are. Same thing as when we talk about students being in the mainstream. Mainstreaming went out in mid-90s. Inclusion came in. We're doing what we're supposed to, but they think we're not because we're not using the right terms. So we're working to get everybody to change those terms so that they can see what we're doing. But what that has meant is that we can no longer take students in their 4-year cohort and take them off campus, have them working in the garden, doing, going to Pizza Hut in the middle of the day, because they have to take the exact same courses in the 4 years that every other high school student has to take, only in an access level. So that has been really hard for parents and for schools to understand. And it's not, once again, it's not something that I'm coming in saying, this is a new idea that we have to do. It's no, the law changed and we've got to catch up. And so that's where we are. So these things are the only way a student can stay is if they choose to defer the receipt of their standard diploma. And I'm talking kids that you were talking about from Hillcrest. There are 5 ways that you can defer. Very few of those have anything to do with the majority of the kids we talk about. For example, a student can stay if they need another year to get their scholar designation. They can stay an extra year, and this is where the state doesn't always talk to each other. They can stay to finish their IB diploma, but IB says you can't get an IB diploma if you didn't do it in 4 years, but the state says you can defer to do it. So they aren't talking to each other again. And that's just pretty typical of what we get. But the main reason our students would defer is to go into a structured work-study program. We haven't really had a true structured work-study program. And that's what we're in the process of building right now. And I will tell you, our ultimate goal would have had for it to be on CF's campus so that they could have an authentic transition to CF. They turned us down, and that's okay. We're going to step back. We're not going to stop trying, but we're going to punt and figure out what we can do for this year. So right now we're looking at having a site in each area that is not on a high school campus, so they authentically transition to their work-study program. That program, they'll be doing some academic things that go with work in the morning, first period, last period, and then they'll be going out to work within the district. Our goal will be to have them all in one location, because the one thing that frustrates me is that we say we have a work-study program and they all go to Pizza Hut and that's the only place you can go. Well, I don't want to work at Pizza Hut. I want to be a cosmetologist. Well, I probably am not going to be able to cut hair and color hair, but I can work in a salon, and I can do a lot of jobs in the salon without having to be a cosmetologist. But we may have one student in Denella who that's what they want to do, and one at Forest and one at Bellevue, and if we don't have them all in one place, it makes it very difficult. Once again, hubbing them together so we can get them what they authentically want. We should be helping them find jobs and have experiences in the things they want to do in their careers rather than on what we have available. And so that's the direction we're moving, and we're moving along.
So is MTC an
MTC,
option?
they currently, it looks like, only have space for one classroom.
Oh.
We have found space at MTI with one classroom, and we're now working with Howard Academy to see if we can find a space in that building that would allow us to have a spot in Area 1, Area 2, and Area 3.
Okay.
So that's where we're at now, since we weren't able to get in the CF route. We really wanted to do that and bring all the kids together, but we aren't going to be able to do that this year. Students from Hillcrest will remain at Hillcrest. Their work study will be through Hillcrest. Okay? So this gives you some of this. Now, the hard part of this is that just because a parent or student says they want to defer, it's not automatic. It used to be automatic. You could stay till you're 22. You can't. You have to request a deferral by May 15th in writing, and the IEP team has to meet and determine that you still need services from Marion County Public Schools in order to access what you're doing. So that's going to be a really hard piece of this. For example, one of the other reasons you can defer is to take basically CTE classes that lead to college credit. And that is very clear in the law. It isn't just take the class. It's take the class that leads to college credit. So if the student can pass the class by sitting there with somebody with them, that's wonderful and it's a great experience, but is that going to truly lead to college credit? Are they going to be able to take that exam and get the credit? And if the answer is no, those IEP teams are going to have to make hard decisions and say they don't meet the criteria. And that is not a place we've ever been before. And it's not a comfortable place to be. But we have to be cautious. What we can't continue to do is have students returning to our schools because they're taking one CTE class and then filling their day with art, music, or PE. That isn't what the work-study deferral or what the deferral process allows us to do anymore. So if that is a decision, that student should come for one period and go home after that one period. If they have 2 periods of CTE class, they stay for 2 periods, they go home. And that is a whole different world. We had a situation this year where a parent said she wants to be in the class with her friends. It was still on the same high school campus. We don't have anybody off their campuses. She wants to be in the class with her friends. She wants to eat lunch with her friends. She wants to have the same schedule as her friends. Her friends haven't graduated from high school. They haven't met the criteria to graduate yet. She has. So you can't continue to put that student back in the classroom over and over again when they've met the criteria to graduate. So it's been a challenge.
But we've been doing that in the past.
Yes.
What about our students at Hillcrest? I mean, how can they even begin to meet some of this?
They can. And the way we can do it is if they can't, they didn't put all this in here, but they actually have to pass the EOC. And it is an EOC that is an access point. End of course exam. Thank you, Nancy. An end of course exam. But it is a modified end of course exam. The state put into place that you have to have, if they don't get a 3 or higher on the end of course exam, then you have to have a portfolio, and the IETB team has to say yes to the portfolio. That's one of the reasons we're looking at getting supplemental materials for Access Algebra, Access Biology, things that have end-of-course exams, because then the teachers aren't trying to create a portfolio. They keep samples of the child's work from that course, and it actually creates the portfolio for them. We don't want to put anything else on our teachers, our guidance counselors. They have been put upon so many places that we need to pull it back. We need to provide the support to our administrators and to our teachers. And I think we'll stop seeing so much turnover of our teachers when we're giving them that level of support.
I agree. Yeah.
We're working. So what are we doing right now? We have Project Search right now. It is in its second year, and it is at the Hilton. This allows us to provide internships to students with more significant disabilities. They actually go through 3 rotations of an internship, and many of those students are getting hired by the Hilton. Next year, we're expanding this to Bridgewater Park, so we will have 2 separate sites. That way, we have people who want to be in a medical health care field have a place to internship, and those who want to be in some sort of hospitality have an internship. The tricky thing about Project Search is that the requirement of Project Search is it has to be their final year of schooling. So does that mean we have to wait till they're 21? No. They can go straight their first year out of high school, but the student and the parent have to agree that this is their last year. You can't go through Project Search and come back to the school district. So that is a little bit of a touchy spot, and that's hard to get families to understand. And we talked about what we're going to be doing with our project work, our transition work study program, and how we're trying to move it forward. Questions? That was a whole lot of information.
Do we have anything yet for the students that are our seniors that do want to start to learn something? I happen to know of one, and he's in the extended school at Vanguard. He graduated from Forest. And he used to say, I just want to work on cars.
That's what we hope to do with our structured work study, is like I gave the example of the young ladies that might want to be in cosmetology. There may be young men who want to work in a garage, work on cars. Are they going to be able to do everything?
He even said to me, I'm smart enough to change oil.
Exactly.
And I said, I'm sure you are. But he said, I can't do any of that until after I graduate from where he was at Forest in the ESE, until I graduate, because he said that he couldn't get to some place where he could do that. I think they were doing a little bit at NTI, but we didn't have busing for the ESE.
Right, and that's where this work study, long term, that's where I see us going. Short term, we have to have a program in place, and we really don't have a program in place. We're still doing CBDT, and we have to get this program in place. Once the program's in place and we get an idea of the students are here after the first year, our first step is to do authentic transition assessments. What do you really want to do? Not what we have available. What do you want to do?
He said, I could learn to paint a car. I could do the sanding. I mean, there's a child that was putting all this together, and he's an extreme ESE student, but he kind of knew what he'd like to do, but there was just nothing.
And all students with disabilities are going to have that opportunity if we defer.
That's awesome.
And that's where we will want to build it. That's why we really want it in one location. That way we can take the 5 students, if that's their interest, and get them that training and get them that so that they are able to go on. They have to get their credits to graduate from high school. They just don't have to stay until they're 22 and then go do this. They get through their 4 years, then we start working on where they go from there. Okay?
Dr. Ellis, will kids with disabilities be able to participate in vocational training before they graduate, like starting in 9th grade?
It will be very limited. It will be very, very limited because they have to finish in their 4-year cohort. So they have to take the same courses unless a parent decides to put them on an 18-credit accelerated, or those courses can count toward electives. It would be very difficult. Your freshman year is too full in most cases to have students going to vocational classes. So it is a challenge, and it's going to be
Why
hard.
wouldn't the ESC parent, though, decide to put them on an 18 credit? Because they're not college bound. You know, they just want to learn a trade of some kind.
Correct.
So it seems like we would be advising them to do the 18 credit. How is it?
We can't advise a parent one way or the other. As an
but giving them
IEP team, we give
information.
them the options, and at every meeting, the parent has to agree, and if they change the option, they have to change it in writing. And there's a lot of nuances that I didn't go as deep into, because each one of the things I've talked about, we could do a 3-hour session on each one of these independent areas.
But if they did an 18 credit, then they could start a vocational program earlier, because
Well, they would defer at the end of their 18 credit option. It would still be when they defer. It would not be during their 18 credit. So we're still working through that. We know it's a challenge. We know it is a tremendous, tremendous mind shift from what we have been doing to what the state put into state law 5 years ago. And so we're trying the very best we can to get us where we need to go.
I think we're in good hands right now.
We're working on it. So organization of special students here in Marion County. Elementary, this is where we currently have programs sitting. So we have an autism program at Anthony, Maplewood, Marion Oaks, and Saddlewood. We have EBD classes at Bellevue, Emerald Shores, Greenway, Marion Oaks, Spar, and Highlands. We have intellectually disabled classrooms at Denellen, Maplewood, and Ocala Springs. Varying exceptionalities classrooms at all of these schools that are listed. Physically impaired and deaf, hard of hearing are only located, deaf, hard of hearing is only located at the elementary level at South Ocala. PI is only located at Maplewood and at Marion Oaks. Now, PI is not, that is the term Marion County uses. It is truly OI, orthopedically impaired. So that's what we're talking about when we talk PI, is orthopedic impairments, okay? All of the elementary schools, with the exceptions of these schools, have at least one VE self-contained classroom. So as you can see, just at the elementary level, with 6 behavior specialists, it would be impossible to cover every single one of those schools with any type of real intensive, meaningful intervention. And that's why we're looking at doing something different next year, so we're able to do that. The middle school, this is where we currently have, you can see every school, middle school and high school, has VE self-contained, and then we have a few schools that have ASD, EBD, and IND. I will tell you, it's very difficult for a school administrator to manage all of those type of things on the same campus. And it's hard for administrators, it's hard for the teachers, it's hard for everyone involved. So it is a challenge. So that is where they currently are. In your packet, I also gave you one other document of how we intend to staff the programs when they move to a hub site. And I'm not going to go over it in depth, but it is there for you of how we intend to staff it. What my goal is that it is staffed consistently across the levels and across schools. And it has information on it of when we would look at adding another para, when we would look at adding another teacher. All of those things are there because I think one of the things we have to get a handle on is being consistent and transparent. So a school knows that if 9 is what we are looking at in that classroom, that when we get 50% greater than the guideline, we're going to be looking at adding another teacher. So there's no question about that. If we get it, in between there, we may be looking at another para. But that we have a guideline that's consistent and people aren't having to guess. And I think that will stop a lot of concern when it's clear and consistent. Questions? Okay. So then I had questions earlier on how our programs are funded. This is for ESE specialists, this is a full day training on how you do this. I do not expect you to have that kind of level when you're done. Only somebody who's gone through the full training can fill out this document. You have a copy of the actual document in your packet. There's also a full manual that goes with it so you know what you can and can't mark. The way our programs are funded, it's called a matrix of services. It is a document that is used to determine the cost factor for selected exceptional education students based upon decisions made by the team. And that goes into 5 areas. Domain A is curriculum and learning, B is social emotional, C is independent functioning, D is healthcare, and E is communication. In each one of those 5 levels, there's another 5 domains, there are 5 levels. And the 5 levels talk about the intensity of services that are provided within each domain. So you see how it's very convoluted, very difficult. It was somebody's dissertation, just as an aside, some fun fact, it was a person's dissertation when we changed from funding based on category of exceptionality to actual services being provided. Okay? So the matrix of service funding at the end is going to give you an overall support level. 251 through 255. 251 is the lowest funding level. 255 is the highest funding level. That means that the services that those students need are so intensive that it's taking lots of staff, lots of people to meet those students' individual needs. The funding is based on the IEP. You can't just go through the document and check. You write the IEP based on the services the student needs, and then you reflect those services onto the matrix of service document. So this is how they are funded. If you can see an ESD support level 1 student, this is this current year, if they're in grades K to 3, they get $7,900 approximately per year above what you get for any other student in school. So a student who is speech or language impaired only, majority of them score at that level 1. That means that they are bringing in $8,000 more than anyone else. Well, we all know that the contracted speech language pathologists are costing a lot more than that $8,000. So we never can get what we need based on this. So as you look at the difference between a level 1 and a level 4 or a 5. If you're receiving if a student needs intensive behavioral support, if they need counseling, if they need a very small class ratio, if they need intensive ABA interventions, all of those things would be reflected in their IEP. Once they're reflected in the IEP, we provide the service and we fill out the matrix of service form appropriately. Now this money does not come to the ESE department. I want to make sure that's clear. This money goes into general fund. It does not go into the ESE department. So this has nothing to do with how we're funded, what we're funded, but this is how the district is funded for the services that we have provided.
Okay, do you have a form that shows like what percentage of our ESC students are on level 4, level 5?
I can give you that. It's through the FTE office, and I can ask Vicki Vaughns to print that for me and get you a percentage. Yes.
Yeah, so kind of know which ones of our ESC students, that would basically be of those 6,900 students, right? Mm-hmm. Which ones are at the different levels?
The majority of our students are at a 251 or a 252 of the 6,900.
Okay.
The students that will be in our special hubbed programs, if they need that intensive services, they would be at the 254, 255 level. If they're in VE self-contained, they're probably in the 252 to 253 level, and that's a generality. because each student is individual. Like I said at the very beginning, every student is individual. So there could be a student sitting in a general ed classroom who's able to fund it at 254 because of the level of service we're providing. It just is so individualized that that's where we are.
I would just be curious, of the 6,900 or whatever, what percentage is that each?
I can figure that out.
That's not a hard question.
No, it is not, and I'll have them run it, and I'll send you an email.
Can you send it to Mr. Gibson? He can send it out to all of us.
Absolutely, I will.
Thank you.
No problem. All right, and the last piece that has been a hot topic is Senate Bill 1108. You have a copy of Senate Bill 1108 in your packet. I'm not going to go over the entire Senate bill. I'm going to hit the highlights, but I'm going to spend time talking on the piece that has the most controversy and the most concern from parents, from outside providers, and from schools, to be perfectly honest. There are principals who are very concerned about this. So I'm going to take a few minutes and go over this with you. So Senate Bill 1108 talks about, this one? No. It has a variety of things. Its purpose is to enhance and not supplant the district's responsibilities. So it allows for private providers that the parents pay for. So the parent has hired an outside provider, or they're being paid, the outside provider is being paid through parent insurance. Those type of providers are limited in who they are in this Senate bill. So it says, this bill says that schools have to collaborate with parent-hired private providers to come into the schools and to support the student in the school and provide a service to the student that the parent has hired that provider to provide. Okay? There are only a few categories of people who can do this. It has to be an applied behavior analyst. They can either be a board-certified assistant behavior analyst at the bachelor's level, a board-certified behavior analyst at the master's level, or a board-certified behavioral analyst doctoral level. Those are the only behavior analysts that can come in and provide the service in the schools, not a registered behavior technician. A registered behavior technician is certified through the Behavior Analyst Certification Board. And that process is somebody with a high school diploma. According to the board, they are equivalent to a paraprofessional, and they have received 40 hours of training and have passed an exam. Okay? So those folks work with many of our providers that work in our community, and they are valued folks working with that provider and that agency. They just don't fit under what the state says fits in this category. The other folks that can come in are speech-language pathologists, occupational therapists, physical therapists, psychologists, or clinical social workers. This one has been a concern, and I will tell you it's a concern statewide, because there are people, they do not have a licensed mental health counselor listed there. They have a clinical social worker. Licensed mental health counselors, in many cases, have higher credential than the licensed clinical social worker. For some reason, the legislature left that out. And I can't speak for the legislature and why they did what they did, but they left that piece out. So those are the folks that can come on campus. Now, I will be perfectly forthright and upfront. We had to change the process. And I worked closely with Mr. Gibbs to get our paperwork in alignment with what we have to do. It is frustrating to parents. It's frustrating to private providers. I acknowledge that clearly. The frustrating point is, as you look, there are certain pieces. They have to enhance, not supplant, the district's responsibilities under IDEA. So they can't come in and work with the student for 2 hours, 3 days a week, because we don't have access to that child in order to be able to teach them the things we're responsible for during that time. It's there to promote educational progress and readiness. The requirements, and this is a hard one, is the principal has to consent to the time and place. It is not something I say when it can happen. It's not something that our outside providers can say can happen. The principals have to make those decisions because we know that there are times in the day that it's not appropriate. I just saw one come through from the middle school, and it was for a clinical social worker. It is approved, but the principal only approved it during certain periods, no core instructional classes, and not at all during testing windows. That is the principal's prerogative to put those parameters. And then we have the issue with our students being transient. If they move from one school to the other, the provider has to have it filled out again because the new principal has to agree to the time and place. And what may have worked on one campus no longer works on a different campus. Right this minute, we have one agency and one outside social worker is all we have working with our students in this district. All the other private providers are providing services after hours or in their clinic or in different ways. So we're working very closely in order to meet what we need to do and do what's right for the kids. The other thing is they have to go through all the background checks. We have to check their credentials. It's one of the things before we can approve it. We have to go on at the Behavior Analyst Certification Board website every single time to check to make sure the certification is still valid. And I'm going to use myself as a personal example. I realized last weekend that my certification expires on March 31st. I lost sight of it completely. I have my continuing ed. I had not applied for it. At any time, that can happen to any single person. You're in the middle of things and you forget to do it. We have to make sure their certification is still valid every single time. So that's one of the things we have to go through in order to get it processed. We now have a streamlined process. We have one person in the ESD department where all of the forms are coming into. The other piece that is tricky on this is that the forms cannot be initiated or generated by the provider. It has to be initiated or generated by the parent. And there was a situation earlier this year with it was not a behavioral provider, it was a counselor. And I actually, the child was a child of an employee in our district. And I had never seen the paperwork, but I was getting called every day from this provider, when can I go in, when can I go in? So I reached out to the employee, and she said, absolutely not. I did not give permission, and I don't want them coming into the schools.
That was the parent?
That was the parent. And so the provider was trying to do it because that's when they wanted to come, but the parent had clearly not. So that's where, that happens very rarely, very rarely. But that one case is the one we've got to be in touch with. And so, can it get better? Absolutely. Is it there yet? We're almost there. And we now have consistent forms. At one point, psych services did the ones that came in from counseling. Somebody else did ones for social work. We did ones for behavior analysis in the ESD department. And what we did was pull them all into the ESD department because this law only works with students with disabilities. So you might as well have it all in one department. And that's where some problems were at the beginning of the year. We had, psych services had one form, and counselors had another form that they had made copies of, and it wasn't current. So that's where we are and where we're going. The final thing is they're not there to evaluate or instruct teachers, and they're not there to intervene in a situation in the classroom. They're there to provide a service to the child that's over and above what we provide for the child during the school day. Questions? Okay. That is the end of this very lengthy presentation. Do you have anything I've covered that you'd like me to go back to?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, well, first of all, kudos. I feel comfortable with the direction that we're moving. I finally feel like I have an understanding of what the issues are, what the issues were, and the fact that you have a plan in place to address those. I feel very comfortable with that. I would like for you just to take a couple of minutes. Let's talk about the hub situation that we currently have. I know there were some concerns with students being placed in the hubs that took the number of students for compliance over the limit. So that we're all comfortable with the current situation and can answer those questions, can you help us understand where we are currently?
Okay, so where we are currently is that we have moved forward with the form I gave you of how we were going to allocate. The program started with the current staff that was on, one teacher, one para for the classroom. We have gone ahead and approved, and they are hiring the additional paras. I believe at Anthony and SPAR, they hired, SPAR, I spoke with SPAR yesterday. She has another interview today. She's hired 2 of the 3 she needed. She has another one. We pulled the para out of Project Search at the Hilton and placed it there, so she had the additional support. We also pulled in behavior techs to give additional support at that school until they are fully trained. We have a training plan that's in place. They trained on the half day yesterday, and we are trying very diligently not to put additional students in that classroom for the remainder of this school year. I will tell you that that is a fine line that I am walking, because only an IEP team can determine a child's placement. I can't determine a child's placement. You can't determine a child's placement, only an IEP team. So I have to be very cautious in saying, IEP team, you can't put this child XYZ location. It is, I can say, it is outside of guidelines. We would prefer you didn't. Can you support? What supports can we provide you at your school for the remainder of the year? This is what we can provide you, but I cannot tell them you cannot do it. But to date, we have not added additional students to that program since the first 2 or 3 weeks when the principal added 4 students of her own out of her VE class into that classroom. And that's where it happened. Anthony was a different story. They still have not been able to hire one of the teachers. The units are there, the allocations are there. The number is high because they couldn't hire a teacher mid-year. And as soon as they can fill that position, those numbers are going to come down where they intended to be when we moved the program. But because we couldn't, we had the additional volunteer to go to Anthony, but that would have left Oakcrest without the teacher. And with Oakcrest being where they are, we were not going to take the teacher they needed and put it at Anthony, so that left Anthony with an open allocation. And they just haven't been able to hire it. But that will in its own time, will work its way out. But we're providing, if you really wanted the details, I have 3 pages of back-to-back. This is what we did on this day, this is what we did on this day. Principal said this was a concern, this is what we had in place the next morning. I have all of that, and I can share that with you, but I think it's just a little over. But we are addressing each one of those individually.
And are you hearing, what is the feedback you're hearing from the parents on the hub situation?
I have heard primarily positive. I will tell you primarily positive. When we redid IEPs at Anthony, it's even in the notes on the IEP section. Thank you so much for doing this for my child with autism. They're finally getting what they need. Some of the parents, we hear more from parents of students in Gen Ed at SPAR. And the parents of students with disabilities, it's mixed. And I will be perfectly honest, it's mixed. I'd be lying if I didn't, and I don't do that. So I think it's mixed because we started with the 1 teacher and 1 para, and now that we're getting the staffing where it will be for next year, and that's why we have a form, I think that's making the difference. I know the majority of students are not getting an excessive number of referrals. Some of them have not had a referral since we made the change. Very few parents, if less than 5, have been called to pick their child up from school, which was happening for students in both of those programs on at least a weekly basis, if not a daily basis, and that is not happening any longer.
I want to talk about your numbers that you just brushed over. Did you say this is Florida State? Like
No.
This, or is this our guidance?
This is our guidance, and what I use, so you can, let me pull that out so I can look at it and refer to it. But what we did primarily when we looked at that was we looked at class size for the VE self-contained. So class size K-2 is on there, and that's how we did that VE self-contained. The other was to maintain a 3-to-1 ratio for the majority of the school day. That's why you can go up to approximately 11 in a classroom. I will tell you 11, in my personal opinion, is too high. I won't say that it's not. I taught EBD with a lot, 11K to 5. It's a lot, and it's a lot of hard work. So that is not where we ever want to get. There it is. But this is where we hope to start the units. And if you can see at the bottom, if you hit 50% or greater, that's when we would be adding another teacher or a para.
So is that 13 and a half students?
Of course, we aren't going to wait till there's a half a
Okay, well,
student.
that's what I'm like, how are we getting, and then it says May.
Right.
And that concerns me because like some of these I'd be like, okay, 9 students, 2, 3 adults, depending on the class. But I also know there may be a class that's full of 12 students or 13
It
or
could.
whatever. And that one teacher, 2 paras or whatever is not enough and it's dangerous. And that's
The
what
May
concerns
is
me.
there for the reason the May is there are some students who go to inclusion for 2 and 3 periods of the day. And so they're on this class roster. And we don't want to say there's 9 students on the class roster and 4 of them go out for 3 periods a day and the teacher is sitting with 5 kids the majority or half of her day. It wouldn't make sense to add another teacher at that time. So that gives you the flexibility to take a look at that.
Well, I don't know. Some of the class I was in, 5 students and 1 teacher was, I saw potential for, well, actually I didn't see it. Just like again, it just seemed dangerous and it concerned me a lot actually. And then also that concerns me, if the teacher would even stay, when they're concerned like that. But I mean, we'll see how this goes. I hope we're paying attention to what our teachers and principals and everyone is saying and making sure, because every class and situation is different, but I surely hope that we're, listening to what they have to say.
And we are working on looking at using, in these more intensive classrooms, a different type of de-escalation training that is more intensive, and looking at doing some more intensive de-escalation training than we have in the past, which will help with that as well. And that was the first step we took at SPAR yesterday. We did the whole half day on de-escalation training, and then they're scheduled to do another set of training after that. So providing that more intensive than what we have had in the last year or 2, 3 years, something like that, 4 years. We've had CPI. CPI only goes so far, and for those students that you're talking about, it's very difficult to be able to de-escalate them or to intervene with CPI. So in these hub sites that are more intensive, we're looking at providing a more intensive model to support that so that we can help bring it along.
That's good. Okay. We're aware of that.
Absolutely. I was an EBD teacher, so believe me, I understand probably better than most. And at sometimes 5 can feel like 20. And in other cases, 20 can feel like 5.
Right.
It just depends on where you are in the process and the team that's working together. And our goal is for all the classes to be successful.
Because when I see 9 and then I see 13, those 4 students, it doesn't sound like many, but the dynamics can change. And
Correct. And that's where you have to make individual decisions, and you have to look at school-based individual decisions. And do you need to move a 3rd grader up into the 4th grade class because they are the age of a 4th grader, but they're really only in 3rd grade? And is it more appropriate? Are the behaviors more socially appropriate? There's all kinds of those individual decisions that have to be made at a school level. And we're here to support them in those decisions.
Right. And one more question, because I've heard, how does information get trickled to the teachers? Because I hear that information is given at administrative level, and they know what's going on, but by the time it's trickled to the teachers, they're not even really sure why they're doing it. Like, what's the purpose?
We make ourselves available to every principal to train their staff. We have offered that. We train the principals, and they are the administrator of their building. And so we allow them to determine the way they want that information disseminated. If a principal says, nope, I want to do this myself, I want to meet with my teachers, I want to do it because I'm the leader, and they need to know that I'm the one that wants it done this way, then we absolutely will allow that. We also are always open. If you need somebody to come in and sit with you just to answer questions, that's what we're here for. And so we offer that to every individual principal, and some principals take us up on that and some don't. Just like I said, we've now met with every single high school with the exception of one, and the only reason we haven't met with them is it was scheduled today. And I had to reschedule it so that I could be here. But we have one high school. We're sitting because we know that information gets to a smaller group better. They can ask questions like you have asked questions. Whereas if you do it in a large principal meeting or something like that, something gets lost in the translation, or they don't want to ask questions, or a teacher doesn't want to ask a question when we're in an in-service of 150 teachers. They don't want to ask that question, or one takes control and then the other one doesn't talk. So we're trying to do them in small individual meetings with the schools and offer it to those principals.
Yeah, I just think the communication is important because, like I said, I think teachers just feel like they're out here and they're not even understanding why or the purpose. And I've heard about so many changes. Like I had one teacher say, Kelly, I had 5 different changes in 6 days over the same topic. And when they're just bombarded and they're being hit, they're just.
And it's overwhelming. And I would say the communication on the other side is frustrating as well. For example, one principal asked specifically, this is what we think we need. We worked, we created it, we sent it, we got no response. We sent it again, we got no response. So when I followed up, it's, I sent it out to my teachers to get their feedback, and I was going to tell you later. Well, now it's 3 weeks later, and we're trying to follow up to make sure we haven't dropped the ball. They've moved on doing things to get more feedback in other locations, but they didn't let us know that it was happening. So we're thinking that there's something wrong when they've really just taken it to the next step to get the feedback and buy-in from their teachers. So we have to work with our schools to get good feedback from the school level, as well as for us to get good communication back down to them as well.
Well, I thank you. I know you are tackling a lot and trying to.
Our kids are worth it.
You bet they are.
Our kids are worth it.
That is our reason.
That
is the why.
Exactly. That is the why. Exactly.
And Dr. Alves, that's something that has really bothered me about being a school board member. Because I do know some disabled children. And it was tearful for me to hear this particular one say, I just want to learn how to change oil. I can do that. But there was absolutely I called the district. This was about probably maybe 3 years ago, maybe it's been that long, and maybe 4. And I called the district and I asked about programs for them besides just going out at PE and doing their change counting that they do, how they make money and they have their little store and everything. Because I went over the force and I saw how it all was. And I sensed this frustration 4 years ago, whenever it was in my first term, with the ESD teachers, because I went to an IEP meeting with a couple of the kids over there. And the teachers of those days, they got me off to the side and said, Miss Stacy, keep pushing for this. We've got to have transportation for these children to get to where they need to go, because there's no way. Okay, we have all these ideas, but no way to get the kids, if they're going to offer it at MTI or whatever, or once, there's no way to get them there because there's no transportation
And
funding.
I think the structured work study will help, because now it's in law. Now we can transport them. We don't have to worry about the fact that they haven't met their criteria to graduate, because they have, or they can't go into this program, and we can get them those things. And a student may only need to stay 1 year in a structured work study and be able to learn what they need to do and be employed and then move on. And that's what our goal is. My goal is that all of our kids have authentic transitions from being a high school student to going into a post-secondary of whatever it is. It still is considered secondary school on paper because they're ours, but they're not taking high school courses anymore.
And I guess my main point of the whole thing in those days was, the state gives us so much money from the time they're in kindergarten, they're disabled, they're ESD students, from kindergarten to senior, so much money the taxpayers have invested to give these children a future, and then they have nothing when they graduate.
And that's what we're changing. That's what we're changing. And that's where we're moving, and that's what we're going to start seeing as a difference for our kids.
That we just dropped the ball on.
It's because every child is college bound and they're all going to go to a 4-year university.
And they're not. They're not. but they're all going to be able to reach a high level. They deserve the same rigorous instruction. They deserve to reach the potential of what they want to do.
And what they're capable of achieving.
Exactly, and
You
not.
have to look, and I mean, I think I'm like, if they were my children, what I would be wanting for them, and I would have been kicking and screaming for years. I mean, I can understand why some of these parents just get so upset, because it's some of the stuff is just so doesn't make sense. We invest all this money, but then we just say, and then they're back on the world with nothing. That so much money's been given for 12 or 13 years, and it's like nothing at the end. They don't have a job, they don't have a talent, they don't have anything. And so thank you for, that's my heart, that's those children, the children that that want to work, but we're determined just to put them on special service money and tell them, you can go bag groceries somewhere, but that's the max we're going to teach you. But
that's why we're going a different direction, and the state recognized that, and that's why they changed the law, and that's why they did the things they did.
And thank you for this presentation, because the amount, I don't know whose idea this was.
Nancy's.
Nancy's. What a great idea, because my gosh.
She knew we knew nothing about ESD.
She's watched us for years, not know anything about it. And so thank you, Nancy, because this has helped me understand. I feel like I have a college degree in ESD right now. From where I was.
But you need to know that you don't.
Oh, no.
Annually.
I mean, that's how much I feel like I've learned. I went from absolutely nothing to knowing a whole lot. I think I could go.
And actually, we all start over again every year on July 1 because the legislature makes changes to the law, and we have to learn how that law has supposed to be interpreted and how we're supposed to implement that law that happens July 1.
Yeah.
All right?
Thank you.
Well, thank you. And since we have David there, because this is another concern that I've heard, and it's been from different schools in our county, and I've been hearing about the teachers getting beat up, like black and blue, bloody lips, I mean, extreme things. What is done to protect our teachers? Because it's my understanding, like, for example, like they've been beat up a few times, and they're like, I'm going to press charges, and they're told if they do, they will not have a job next year. So,
I don't know, who would have
I've
thought?
heard that.
Teachers are always entitled to press charges.
Absolutely.
I'm the one out
If
there
they're
telling them
attacked
to
by-
press charges,
by a
and
student.
OPD won't help us, and I'm calling Greg Graham all the time saying, why won't you file charges?
I'm going to keep Dr. Albies here because a little bit of it depends on the type of student. State statute is pretty protective of a regular education teacher working with reg ed kids as far as protecting themselves. We have told our deans that if they've got a regular education student, their best practice is to use a teach style or CPI style restraint, just so that we can show if there would ever be litigation that they're using a recognized way of restraining a
And
child.
that they've been trained
Yes.
in using that.
Yeah.
And I kind of,
Everyone's been trained, that's with
Okay,
Incidence.
so-
That's why I'm keeping Dr. Albies here, that is part of what she was talking about, of looking at a teach protocol for our more intense placements.
so there are a lot of things that can happen once we have the hubs where they need to be. Teach is a more restrictive de-escalation and hands-on advanced control procedure training. It needs to be monitored highly by someone who is a trained trainer and using it all the time. So we're looking at next year utilizing this protocol in classes that have emotionally behavior disordered students, as well as students who are on the modified curriculum autism side. Because students on modified curriculum in the autism program don't always have the verbal skills that we need that come up in CPI. CPI does have a training for autism, but it doesn't go to the length that some of our children are.
What does
And what's-
CPI mean again?
It's Crisis Prevention Institute. So the plan in the initial stages is that Crisis Prevention Institute, which is less restrictive, less hands-on, less intensive, will be used at all the school sites that do not have a hubbed EBD or ASD program. The school sites that have the modified ASD or EBD will have the teach training. That's where the behavior specialist will be full-time on that site. They will be the trainer, and they will be the one that helps guide the team as to if a restraint is called for, if it's not called for, or how we intervene. And with that, when that is over, it requires a debriefing directly afterwards. What worked? What did we miss? I think I said to you, I questioned myself when I was in the classroom. If I had to go that far, what did I do different? What did I miss? That's what that debrief is for when it comes to teach. CPI is more of a program that is good for everyone. And so yes, it is in place. Yes, schools have had that training. Everybody in this district has had that training. We've made it available. Some schools have done really well with training their staffs. We paid to have trainers at each one of those sites. Some of the schools did a really good job training, and some of those schools did not do a really good job training. So the majority of the students where somebody's going to get hurt or injured will be one out of these two type programs. So if the students are on those campuses, whether they're full-time in gen ed on those campuses or they're full-time and self-contained, we'll have a more intensive training that we can monitor better. And then we will take the step of reporting it to the state away from the principals and the administrators. That should be off their plate. The behavior specialist is the one, or the behavior analyst, making that report. That's one less thing that our administrator has to deal with in that situation. So yes, we are in process.
Report, right?
Excuse me?
Every time a student.
Every time a student has a restraint, it has to be reported to the state, and it becomes public knowledge. And it's public record, and it's out there. So the blended model works well. You don't want the more restrictive taught to schools that don't really have that need. On the other hand, you don't want to tie the hands of folks that need that might be getting injured because we haven't taught anything other than move away. Teaches you how to block. If a student goes to hit you, how do you block appropriately so you won't get hurt? If a student grabs you, how do you get away from the student without harming the student or yourself? So it goes a little more in depth. We don't spend a whole lot of time on it because once things are running the way they're supposed to, the number of restraints will continue to go down, and we'll be able to take that pressure off of schools and staff. The other benefit is that CPI does not have a local contact. We can get in touch with somebody, but the person in charge of teach lives in Brandon. So we can get to them very, very quickly should we have a concern. And the other side product, which isn't the reason why, they are considerably less money. So considerably less money.
Okay, thank you. But also I'm going to reiterate, I've heard it from different schools around this district
So
that
have we.
have been beat up, like
So have we.
physical, and they've been told that. So that is the message out there somewhere along the line. And usually
And we
when
can work with the
Yeah.
deans and the principals
We've
to
had some
reiterate.
conversations with our deans about this
Okay.
already.
So
We
you
can
might
address
just-
this with our building principals. We've
Yeah.
got an upcoming meeting that I've got a little bit of time on the agenda.
And I do as well.
One of the prime responsibilities of a building principal is to protect their staff.
Right.
And there is
not
no
threaten them
excuse
that
for
they
having
won't
a
have
child
job if they
laying
report.
hands.
Correct.
Thank you. Okay.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much. All right, do we have, oh, you have some business?
Yes, several, actually.
Me.
We are on the same wave. I just want to thank you for your presentation. We're on the same wave getting into the crisis prevention, de-escalation, and restraint and seclusion. And I would like to propose that we have another workshop in the not too distant future to address just what you were talking about, because that is a whole nother workshop and then some. Because if you're constantly doing crisis intervention, then you want to be looking at your prevention and your training. And teach is different than CPI, and there are gaps. Our bus drivers come to mind. I mean, when you have students that are on a bus in the middle of the forest and something happens, so there's just there's so much more to ESE than all of the great information that you gave us today. I have serious concerns about these kindergarten through 5th grade units. It's, what teacher, if we're talking teacher retention, what teacher, there's very few that will stay. under those kinds of conditions, being expected to be highly effective or effective and get a bonus for teaching kindergarten through 5th grade, all in the same classroom.
And once we make the hub sites, should not have that happening because we can separate the students. But when they're in all these individual sites and they only have 6 kids or 10 kids and they're mixed K to 5, makes it very difficult to have more than one classroom.
Will the hub sites start, all the hub sites start this coming?
Yes, ma'am. They will start in August.
Okay.
Does class size for special needs students, is there class size for special needs students like there is for?
There is not. Actually, this state, when I have asked for guidance, they say most districts are using standard class size. So when we go to talk about support facilitators, what is the standard class size? We know we can't have 25 students with an autism spectrum disorder on a modified curriculum in the same classroom. It's not possible. It's not humanly possible. When we do talk about allocations, you'll see on a couple of my places that maybe we didn't add a paraprofessional, but we have 2 teachers. It's because when you use class size, they only earn enough for 1 inclusion teacher. We know 1 inclusion teacher cannot serve K to 5, but do they need a paraprofessional as well, or do they need 2 inclusion teachers? So if they're off formula, then we've looked at putting 2 teachers there rather than putting the extra paraprofessional. And the paraprofessionals are something that future we can look at. Other districts do not have paraprofessionals for their inclusion classes. So that's something we can look at going forward as we move forward and we look at what we need. Those are always places we can come. I don't want to see anybody have their positions cut ever, but that's something we can look at as we look through attrition and things like that in the future.
Well, we're talking about class size real quick. Also, high school. I've heard that rumor is next year they're going to put level 1 students in class with ESD. Is that true? Because
We have done
really high.
We have done discussions about flexible scheduling, and that students who need individual supports. Now students are taking all general courses. We're not talking students on modified curriculum, not students on access points. You have a student with a learning disability who needs access algebra or needs algebra 1, just like everybody else, not an access class. And you have another student who's a level 1, not a student with a disability, also needs algebra 1. Your general ed teacher is certified in general ed and ESE. What we have shared is there is no law that says they cannot be in the classroom together receiving the services. That is something we have done in Marion County. That is not something that is law. That is not something that's required, and it actually goes against what the state is asking us to do with least restrictive environment. They're asking them to be an inclusive classroom. By doing that, that will change high school LRE, and that will bring them out of the state's target for that piece. I know that when the ESEA just came out, the rankings, with the exception of 3 schools, students with disabilities was the only area that schools didn't meet. Schools like Westport, that are amazing schools, they didn't meet it under students with disabilities. That's part of it, is for them being included, having a lower LRE, and that will make a difference. We have not told them they have to do that. We have given that information to individual administrators and said, this is your choice as an administration, how you choose to do that. Just letting them know it's not against the law and it's something that absolutely can happen.
Are we going to overwhelm our teachers though when you have a higher class setting?
It won't be it will be higher. It would actually be lower class sizes in those situations. Most of the time they would have fewer students in those classes, and it's a dual certified person. So I can use my brother as an example. He teaches high school history. He's dual certified. He doesn't have an ESE teacher who goes into his room, even though there's a student with a disability who may be in his classroom, because he is dual certified. He doesn't need to have them come in. That support facilitator, that inclusion teacher, can go into another room with a student, with a teacher who isn't dual certified.
I'm just saying, I think I've heard it's overwhelming to teachers. I'm just throwing that out. So it sounds good here. When I'm out there, they're like, that's overwhelming.
And that's,
just relaying that
I'm glad you did, and we'll go back and make sure the principals know. We are not telling the principals they have to do this. We're giving them the option, and that this is one way that you can help more students than just a student with a disability. And you can lower your LRE, and you have flexible scheduling. You are not locked in by a law that says you can't do this. And so
I know we can legally do it, but I'm just
It's
making sure
up
we
to
can
the-
maintain our teachers.
it's up to the administrator to make the decision, and we've
Okay.
just given that as the option, and we've offered support should they choose to do that.
Well, it sounds like we'll have a conversation too with our area directors and perhaps provide some more intensive PD to our principals so
Perfect.
they can be meeting these needs better.
Perfect.
Sounds
And
like
to
it's
make sure
more-
that the concern is that we don't lose good teachers.
Correct.
Doing what,
Yeah.
making our school look good, but then we're not gonna have the teacher in the classroom next year. I mean, that's like a double-edged sword, kind of.
Right.
And change is scary. We know what we have, and it's scary to think of doing something different. And if
Yeah, but
you,
it's also scary doing something suicidal.
that's correct.
And
You
yes,
know?
and you don't want to be our teachers are so overwhelmed at work, and if one more thing on their platter is just like, and the class sizes are enlarged or whatever, but if you're saying they're smaller class sizes.
That has been our
next year.
recommendation, is it's supposed to be smaller class sizes.
Okay, so hopefully that happens. All right.
Well, and it's really about building relationships, because for so many years, ESD has been out here somewhere, and school-based leadership has been here somewhere, and our kids have been warehoused, till they either dropped out or whatever. So trying to build the relationships to bring everybody together onto the same page and build that trust level that these are all of our kids. Every kid that comes through our door is one of our kids in Marion County Public Schools. And there's a million, if anything I took from your presentation today, is that there is a million individualized ways to help students be successful. And that is our challenge. Coming from what you were sharing, Kelly, and to piggyback on that, what I hear a lot from schools is that everything goes fine until the parent goes to lunch. And then the teachers by themselves in the classroom. There's got to be some way to bring in Plan B, backup. Yes, backup.
Should be a floater or something.
Floaters, something along those lines, and everything costs money, so that a teacher is never left alone. If they're supposed to have a para, then there should be
Well,
two in the class.
I will tell you a lot of this, not to interrupt, but this comes down to principals
Yeah.
scheduling properly.
Right,
And one of the things we've done at one of our schools that was struggling a little bit with this is we sent one of my coordinators up to just look at procedures.
Yes.
How are we moving? How are we scheduling lunches? We shouldn't take an
Doing what?
EBD self-contained para and put them on morning duty or have them doing lunch duty for the entire cafeteria. They should supervise their lunch table. So those types of procedural things that principals who haven't necessarily had specialized units on their campus, they can stop that and prevent it, and it's within their realm and their authority to do that.
And as I've been sitting here and we do our employee hearings over the last 6 or 7 years that I've been here, an unusual high average of some of the issues that have happened that the employee is being disciplined for was when the parent was at lunch. It happened. The child ran away, and the teacher is kind of stuck, and she didn't know what happened. And a concerning number have been just because over the last, like I said, 6 years, because the parent was missing. Like she was at lunch, or
It's the way our resources
she was
have been
absent that
spread.
day, or something.
It's a skill of a principal to allocate resources, and again, that's the relationship piece. Whoever has the expertise to help a new principal or principal that's not familiar with high-level ESD kids or whatever it is, it's that relationship to work with each other and learn from each other to help make it better. Again, I really would like to see a workshop going forward in the fairly near future to talk about restraint and seclusion, crisis prevention, and de-escalation. What we're doing to keep not just kids safe, but teachers safe, everybody safe. I mean, my finger didn't get this way for no reason.
Exactly, see?
And also the profiles of some of these kids that we're serving, that we're obligated to serve. A profile of an EBD student that is going to drop the F-bomb on a fairly regular basis in the beginning until we begin to bring their behaviors under control. What are teachers really having to deal with?
Correct.
I think it's important as a board for all of us to really be up to speed on the whole spectrum of kids that we're expected to serve.
And one more thing. I get so many calls from teachers who talk to me, which Kelly probably gets the same people, a lot of them, that talk to me because they're afraid to talk to y'all. And I think that, and maybe it would help if the principals at the schools, because the principals are not ESD specialists, you know? And so they're fearful to say anything because they're afraid their principal will not re-up them if they're not being positive and they're complaining. So if the principals at your principal meetings, if y'all made it clear to them that, you know, there are board members that are concerned about retaliation against a teacher for complaining higher up, that maybe it's a positive thing. Because by her feeling she can talk to you about it, and not her principal necessarily, because he's not he doesn't understand her, he can't feel her pain, he's never been in that room like that. You can feel her pain because you've been there.
Absolutely.
That it's not a negative thing to talk to you and say, okay, this is what I've got going on, so that the teachers do not feel intimidated to talk to someone who can feel her pain, than to go to a principal that's never been there.
Correct, and I will say I've had more than one school staff say to me, for example, Denellen High School, you're the first director I have seen in the last blank number of years. And I've been out to Denellen High for one of their morning staff meetings for teachers for students with disabilities. I'm going tomorrow morning for the same thing. And they're very appreciative that I even give them the 30 minutes that I come out while they're having coffee so they can ask any questions. I've done that at Westport, I've done that at Forest, I've done that at Denellen High. As I'm asked to come out, I've told every single administrator, I have an open door, I am here. I am not the kind of ESD director who sits behind my door and doesn't speak to anyone.
Yeah.
That's not what I do. We have to be able to work together because, as I've said, our kids matter.
Well, and the site managers, I can understand the principals because they don't want to lose their job either. So we got all this intimidation going on, and I'm a lot fear going on. And if everybody knew it was okay, like you said, if you sent one of your district level people to maybe a meeting sometime, an area meeting, whatever, where the teachers, okay, we want to hear your heart. We want to hear it. Man, we'd probably have so much more retention in ESE with our teachers because they wouldn't feel so abandoned and betrayed. They feel betrayed by their principals. They feel betrayed by the ESE department because they're talking to the hand and nobody's listening. And if
I would hope no one feels betrayed by working with us.
No, they do. They feel like culture. When they get beat up in a classroom and nobody takes their side, they feel betrayed. Okay, and so this is a new day, and I understand, you know, and I'm so appreciative of all you're doing. But those are the concerns that we hear, and I call Mr. Ellers, and he's right on it and everything. But they shouldn't have to be. I should be able to say, but I don't feel comfortable doing it yet. I'm feeling more comfortable. You know what, before you talk to me, why don't you call student services? But I'm afraid that somehow over there they'll get lost in the shuffle and then they'll just think I passed them on. So I go ahead and listen, and then I call Mr. Allard, and then we work on it. But I'm not comfortable yet that it's going to be taken care of if I don't be hands-on with it. So,
do you have anything else to add?
Actually, the only last thing that I wanted to say is that having these kinds of conversations are what is going to create the change, you know, and for teachers to feel comfortable sharing their concerns with whoever can help them. And a lot of times it's something as simple as if I just had a two-way radio, so that if my parent has to leave the room to go to the bathroom, you know, something really simple. Or every other classroom has a smart board, but I'm an ESE teacher and my kids are nonverbal, and I'm not getting a smart board because someone said, well, those kids might break it. Well, there isn't one kid in that room that engages in property destruction, so why would you not provide that? And then the teacher leaves because they don't have the basics.
I do, but I will be honest, it is a very fine line between supplanting, because if every other classroom on that campus has a smart board, I can't pay for it out of the IDEA grant. that becomes
Because
supplanting.
it comes federal dollars.
It
can't be
comes
spent.
federal dollars cannot be spent that way.
And that's
So
an education
where I've assisted at 2 schools this year, every school on that, every classroom in that campus did not already have smart boards. That's why I was able to assist in that situation. But if it's a situation where a school, every other classroom has the smart board, I work with the assistive technology or the technology department to work to see what we can do to get those out there.
Kids are engaged and busy, you have a lot less behavior
Correct.
problems.
Absolutely.
This is totally changing the subject.
Okay.
But we're talking EBD students. Do we know, is there any way to determine how many of our EBD students were substance exposed newborns?
Only if the parent self-disclosed that in their actual social developmental history. Some parents are very forthright, some are not. And so we would have to go back through individually each one of those, but many of our parents will not share that information. We can have what we suppose, but we don't have that proof.
There's a method in my madness for that question.
But
More to come on that.
I do believe that is a definite effect, and I think that we've been relatively lucky here with the heroin addiction. However, I see it moving across the entire country, and that is going to be something that we're going to be doing. We've talked, the students in pre-K are coming in with much more significant disabilities than we have ever seen before, and it's not just Marion County. I talked to my counterpart last week. She's the director of early learning in Collier County, former Marion County employee, and she said the same thing. The students coming in are so very different than what we've had.
Last year in Marion County alone, we had identified 64 substance exposed newborns. 64 in 2018.
And they should be getting early intervening
at Advent
services.
Health, which means those EBD classes, and so if there were 64 identified, it's just, so more to come on that.
And the way we work with those students is very different because their chemical balance in their brain, it works differently.
Yep.
So you have to, when you are dealing with functional behavior assessment, functional behavior analysis, the world of applied behavior analysis, you have to make sure you're not trying to change something that is a medical condition, because there's some ethical guidelines that have to be followed when we're looking at medical conditions and intervening with medical conditions. You have to look at things differently.
So more to come. Stay tuned.
Good. Thank you. Very well done.
Thank you.
All right. Is there any public comment?
So, Stephanie, I can ask a question?
Yes, you just have to, well, there's a form for you to fill out afterwards if you want, but we need you to come to the podium and state your name and your address.
It's not,
Good afternoon. Tricia Tarantino, 11322 Southeast 55th Avenue Road, Unit 3202, Bellevue, Florida. And so I just have a question for Dr. Alves. I know that Area 1 has been the model for the hub units, and so I just wanted to know, is there going to be data available that speaks to the success or lack of success in that hub? And I just asked that question because I kind of thought that...
Well, actually, you have to address this.
I'm sorry.
We can
I was just saying my question was pretty much for...
I know it is,
Okay.
yeah, you need to ask
So
us.
in addressing the board, I'd like to know if there's going to be data that supports the success or lack thereof for the Area 1 hub model. And I say that because I serve many clients in that hub. And so in seeing regression in students and other things of that nature, I'm just concerned that we're moving forward now to what I'm understanding is going to be Area 2 and Area 3 with this hub model. And I'm not necessarily sure that we've seen success yet in the Area 1 hub, having the same concerns like Ms. King has shared and other board members of numbers being larger than we anticipated, staff backing out or for whatever reason not being there when we started it and anticipating them being there, putting my clients in larger classrooms. So I'm just, is there going to be data that speaks to that? I would think that typically in a model, we get some data before we move forward.
Great. I will tell you this, as a board member, I would probably speak for all of us, we're monitoring this closely, and that's why we are even discussing this today. I don't know exactly, I just know we've been watching it, and at what point.
Will that data be available publicly, or?
You know what, let me get your number and then we'll
Sure.
talk. Okay, and then we'll see where we can go.
And then just as a behavior analyst from a private provider, I just have a concern, and I'm not so clear about this bullet that appeared in one of these slides about RBTs, specifically RBTs not being allowed in classrooms. Is that a Florida statute? Is that a federal? Well, I'm just not sure, because I know that we saw a statute where it wasn't clear to me in that statute, and maybe I've not been given the right statute, where it said specifically RBTs or spoke to RBTs not being registered behavior technicians, not being allowed in classrooms as a support, because it would seem to me that they are more qualified than a para who has not been trained by a board to deal with behaviors. And so I'm just not clear about that language and where that exactly is, or if it's Florida law, because I know there are a lot of Florida laws that I'm not used to as a former New Yorker.
Okay. I'll have to get back to that too.
Okay, and will the parents know where these hubs are going to be soon? Because the other concern is that it looks like we're moving forward in August, which would again say to me that staff is already in mind, and so we would know where they already are. Because if, again, we're opening hubs where we don't have staff, and I'm new to Florida, this is my 5th year, and I started here teaching, and I have seen a decrease in teachers wanting to teach here, and so I'm concerned about the moving forward model where these teachers trained to deal with ESD students are, as an EBD teacher of 15 years, and where these behavior specialists are going to be coming from.
Well, I know we're going to be discussing the staffing plan. Is it next week, or is it next week? Well, is it on that one?
On every, yeah.
Okay,
on every floor.
so we haven't, as a board, we haven't seen the staffing plans or anything to know how to answer that at this point. So.
And it's Senate Bill 1108 that talks about the RBTs.
But it, so it's Senate Bill.
Well, yes, I've got a copy of it, but I think where we might be getting tripped up is they're talking about individuals certified or licensed. And
I'm sorry,
it says, Senate Bill 1108, Section 5, letter A, individuals certified or licensed for applied behavior analysis. So that may be the caveat there, because registered behavior technicians are neither certified nor licensed. And that may be the tripping point. And which is sad, because RBTs are fantastic, and anyone that can provide more support to our kids, we're certainly in need of it. Our kids aren't getting easier, they're getting harder. So.
Is it difficult to get that certification? Like, what is it?
Oh,
Is
to
it
become a
something-
behavior analyst?
The RBT, so the RBT, or
The tech.
the tech.
But, so Nancy, registered behavior technicians are certified. They are required to receive a certification.
This is just what I'm reading off of the.
That's where I'm unclear, because they are required to pass a certification exam.
Oh, so they are certified.
They hold a registered behavior technician
like me to-
certification.
Yes.
Okay.
If you're prepared.
Because this
They
is
are
something-
absolutely certified by the Behavior Analyst Certification Board, but they're certified as a technician and listed as a para by the board. They are not certified in applied behavior analysis. Only a bachelor's level or above is certified or licensed in applied behavior analysis. And I personally called the state, as well as I've had parents call the state, and the state has said that they are not, RBTs do not meet the criteria under those two statutes because they are not certified in behavior analysis. They're certified as a technician. And that is where the line has drawn and where the state has said that they do not meet that criteria. And I can't give details about the cases because it would become, too knowledgeable about the individual families or the students. But this has gone through the State Board of Education, and they have upheld that they are not certified in behavior analysis. They are a certified technician. Be the same as a paraprofessional who becomes a certified para. That's the same type of certificate. It's not the same. RBT has different, and I said all along, they have a different level of certification, but it's not in applied behavior analysis. It's like we have a difference between people who are certified paras and those who aren't. These are certified technicians versus certified.
How much schooling is involved for an RBT?
It's 40 hours of training, and then they have to pass the test. High school graduate, 40 hours of training and take a test. Behavior analysis requires a minimum of a bachelor's degree. The bachelor's level person has to work directly under a board certified behavior analyst. And then there's the board certified behavior analyst doctoral who can supervise everyone.
Because RBTs have incredibly useful skill
They
sets.
absolutely do.
And applied behavior analysis.
It's a frustration that I wish there was a way to rectify this with the state so that nobody's certification was getting threatened and.
It's called lobbying. Correct, that's why I asked.
It's called lobbying.
Florida? Right, that's why I asked, is it a Florida law?
It is. It is Florida State Statute 1108.
So that I know where we need to lobby.
Right. That's where it was. And no one on that list of approved folks is below a bachelor's degree. Tutors can't come in, other folks like that can't come in. It is only those that are bachelor's level or above, and that's all the people listed there. And actually the BC ABA is the only bachelor's level person. Every other person listed on that is master's level or above.
We need all help we can get.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I'll get you my number so you can
Okay.
get questions. I appreciate it.
All right. Is there any more public comment? Yes, ma'am.
I want to give it to the
Also, Ms. Tarantino?
I'm sorry?
Make sure you fill out that form.
The
that's
blue
on the
form.
table. Yeah.
Good afternoon. I'm Melody Kirsch-Mosier. Do you need me to spell my last name?
Yes.
KIRSCH-MOSIER.
And your address, please.
I reside at 5969 Southeast 171st Court, Ocklawaha, Florida 32179. I am a former Marion County Public School ESD student. I did not graduate from Marion County, and I'm actually really proud to say that. I left Marion County 2 months before graduation. My son has been in Marion County Public Schools since he was actually 4 years ago, so he was just a year old, year and a half, through ARC, early intervention. He was premature, he's got autism, he's ADHD, and a lot of other medical issues, including crying, crocodile tears. I have 2 prescriptions that have been denied for ABA therapy, and as a mother of an ESC kid, it's hard. He's hit me before. He's only 5.5 years old. We corrected that at home through ABA. ABA is to be used in the child's natural environment. One place that is not being used at is in his natural environment in class. That is where it is struggling so much. Part of that statute, the very last part explains the insurance process through the Agency for Healthcare Administration. Through that, they have the definitions as to who can provide services. One of them is RBTs. So I ask you, the board, why is it, knowing if my son is medicated, which he is, supposed to be on Ritalin and clonidine, we're a medical professional, and I don't give him that medication, I can be charged with neglecting my child. My son has prescriptions through 2 doctors for ABA therapy for in school, and he cannot get these services. They're understaffed with behavioral technicians that can come out to East Marion. Why am I going to put him over at Anthony when that's even further from my house for me to travel if something were to happen? He's on the bus already for over an hour one way. I live 7.5 miles away from school. Last year, he was at Fort McCoy, which was even further away from where I live. How much more of his education can be harmed with not having the supports for him?
I am not familiar with exactly what you're talking about, but I wonder if maybe Ms. Albies, Dr. Albies, could maybe, have you spoke to her about
And she keeps saying the same thing, Senate Bill 1108. I have done my research. I have seriously talked to attorneys and everything, and they're like, you have a prescription for something, it's not being taken seriously. My son is 5 years old, just got written up for hitting and biting, but yet he's never been written up through schools for hitting and biting and stuff like that. But I have notes, beyond notes for this school year, that he's been hitting other kids and everything. And it concerns me as a parent, because I don't want him to fail. This is his 3rd year in pre-K, 3rd.
Again, if you want to, Dr. Mayer, I mean, how do we help resolve this? I mean, how
I was going to say, Dr. Elvis, and of course we don't want to get into child-specific discussion right now because this also will be put on our YouTube channel. So I think maybe moving forward with that IEP team, and let's take another look at what exactly is going on, and if he's in the right environment and if we're meeting his needs.
We have an IEP meeting coming up.
Okay, so maybe we can expedite that.
There is a meeting coming up, and we do have a behavior specialist that's actually out there on campus right now supporting schools and supporting that student, as well as a couple of other students there. So it goes back to that it's so hard to get there, but it doesn't mean that it can't be done. The difference that we have, and this is the Medicaid law that allows for who can provide services, allows for the RBT. The 2 entities did not speak to each other, which happens to us in the world of ESD quite frequently. Medicaid allows the parent's insurance to be billed for an RBT service. The Senate Bill 1108 does not. And because we don't get in the world of Medicaid, it is totally separate from this component that's in the law of who can come in and provide services. And then we have to go back to the answer as they can't come in and supplant what we need to be doing. So we can't just have them in and be with them all day, every day. That's not what this is supposed to be. It's the outside provider coming in and providing a service that does not interrupt the educational flow of the entire school, of the classroom, and of the day. So getting into details of individual students, I can't. I've spoken to Mom. I'm more than willing to speak with you again and sit down. We can have the school. I know you have an IEP meeting coming up, and that is the direction that we go. An IEP team has to consider all information that comes in, but an IEP team doesn't have to take a prescription from a medical doctor to determine. It depends on eligibility, and it's a team decision. It's all information that's taken together at the team and is considered when making a decision.
And Mom has a very active voice during this
Absolutely.
meeting.
Oh, absolutely, she does. Absolutely.
And so the Medicaid law is federal law, and then we have.
But not federal IDEA. Medicaid is all billing and insurance and those kind of things, whereas the school district functions under the legislative Senate Bill 1108 that was written on the services we provide in schools. And that happens to us quite frequently in the world of special education. The insurance world usually gets something through first, and then they fight with legislatures to get something changed. But there's almost always a lag, and this has happened in other areas in the past. And then there's been issues with the providers, and some providers are coming in, and then Medicaid doesn't approve them anymore. It just becomes a big. But this does happen, that conflicting laws are written from different sectors, and we are charged with following the ones that are written by the legislature for public education, not for insurance and Medicaid.
Right.
And that's a hard place to be.
Yeah, because it's obvious that your son needs ABA services to be successful.
Correct.
And Dr. Alves, I'm going to speak this to you. Do we have students in Marion County Public Schools that have ABA-related goals written into their IEPs that would trigger support from our behavior support team in a more intense way? Or
for the very first time this year, we do. We have not had that prior to this year. We have not had ABA written into any goal, applied behavior analysis. It has not been written into any IEP prior to this year, and we are writing them into IEPs now. So we are writing them in as needed and as appropriate, and as the services that a student needs, those are being done.
And that's an IEP team decision.
That is an IEP team decision, yes.
And you have an IEP meeting coming up.
Okay, there you go.
Okay.
And it's hard because he last year he had RVPs coming into Marion County Public Schools. They were allowed. Dr. Alves comes in and puts a stop on it, and then
Well,
it's hard.
It's law. The law put it.
But she just made a comment while she was up here saying that on the last subject matter she was talking about, that she's trying to make numbers look good for the state and all, but she's doing it yes, she did. You can shake your head all you want.
I mentioned the least restrictive environment,
Right.
but that's not the purpose. That's one of the ends, but that allows all students to have access to educational services that they may need. So that wasn't the end game of why anything would be done.
Well, for now on, I'll continue letting his academics suffer, unfortunately, because every week he has to be taken out of school. And unfortunately, the school hasn't even been paying attention that his RDT is picking him up out of school, and he puts it as unexcused, and then I have to go back and tell him, hey, y'all got to send in the note every time again, because now they're marking it unexcused, although you're written on the thing as RDT to pick him up for services that he's prescribed to get. But thank you.
Well, Mom, thank you for being involved in your child's education. There comes a time when there's a parent and then there's a system. And your involvement with Dr. Alves and our team, see how you can make it work. You can always come back and talk to us. I mean, we meet on the second and fourth board meeting every Tuesday night at 5:30. And there's a process. You fill out a form by like approximately 5:30, and then you can speak that night on TV. So thank you for putting all your stuff together for your child's education, because so many parents just don't care. They just really don't care. And so, so I don't want you to feel that it's a confrontational thing, because we have some disagreements in body language and different things, says certain things, but I want you to continue on for your child and encourage other moms to continue on for their child, and we can do it in a very respectful manner, but you can always come talk to us. And as we handle them one by one, sometimes there's not like the perfect answer for some of these situations, and it causes our ESD department to really dig deep, because just because they've never made a certain thing work doesn't mean it can't work, and that there's not a way to make things work. So and help us understand as we talk to our legislators what parents need. I mean, we need to know. We don't know unless you come tell us that there's a glitch right here. And it's a glitch that Dr. Alves has to follow the law, but yet then there's conflict of stuff. And if you come tell us this and you make it real clear to me, then we can take it to our legislators and we can say, okay, look, y'all got this problem here. And that's how we all work together so that it's not parents against us. We want to be on the same
resources that you have.
We want to be on the same team.
And that's why I wanted to, cause it's like the RBTs came to be certified through the board 2 or 3 years after Senate Bill 1108 was written. So Senate Bill 1108 has not been touched or revised since the RBTs came in effect. And that's why there's this difference of opinions as to how the bill is written.
This needs to be clarified, and we need to get all the help that kids require from wherever is the legal place for it to come from and appropriate. And you're a piece of that because you're the mom that is speaking out, and thank you. Sometimes it doesn't get done as fast as we'd like it to, but it can change.
And you can change it for other children. So stay involved. Don't ever feel like, don't just throw your arms up and say they're not hearing me, because we are hearing you. And Dr. Alves is hearing you, but her hands are kind of tied. And so she would like for things to not, like the law not to conflict would make her job so much easier.
Amen.
And so if we can, and maybe she can advise me on what can I do as a board member politically,
Right.
as a very active political person.
Right.
What can I do? I'll go talk to somebody. If she comes to me and tells me, Miss Stacy, we need some help politically, go talk to your people, I'll go talk to my people, okay? But thank you for being involved, because that's how we make things work, okay?
Is there any more public comment? With no further business, our meeting is adjourned at 2:20.